Hello. Hope to see people join me today. Wanted to discuss morality. Curious to where everybody gets their morality from. There's a link to join me. All right. Spilled some drink on the floor, but that's okay. So, morality. Where do we get our morality from? All right. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about morality, where we get it from, how I've determined my own morality. Hey, James, I see you there. Hey, James, how you doing?
Hey there, Lou. Am I coming through too quiet or too loud?
Pretty good.
All right. So, doing pretty great. I saw that you were streaming, and I had a lot of channels to pick from, and I'm like, man, I can't pass up on a chance for Lou. Lou's my guy.
Let
So,
me tell you something. I could use the interactions. I don't have much of a following, but
yeah, I can relate to that. And
but
if go ahead.
I'm trying to get out there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I've seen you around. And in the meantime, if a theist, Christian or otherwise, does try to enter like the stage, let me know, and I'll be happy to make room for them. I can step down, and they can step in.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many people can come in at one time.
I don't mind stepping, like leaving for them to come in. That's fine too.
Yeah, yeah.
But for StreamYard, I think it's a 9-panel limit. But a lot of times, like a host prefers one-on-one, so I'll still step out. Either way.
Yeah, yeah. I got a StreamYard, but I have a basic service.
Me
It's
too.
not like expensive, so I'm not sure. But it's doing the trick so far.
Yeah. Yeah, StreamYard recently increased the price they charge for the paid versions. And so now I only just use the free, and if I run out of minutes, I just quit streaming for the month because I'm not paying them $50 a month. It's not gonna happen.
Oh, I'm paying right now. I think it is like that much because I think it's like $17 a week.
Yeah. I won't do it. But if I made money off my channel, I would. But I just talk to talk. It's nice to have someone to talk with or talk to or talk about. So
Yeah, it is expensive if you consider, $50 a month.
Yeah, it adds up. I mean, if you're trying to build a channel that's, financially profitable, a big channel, then it makes sense to pay. But my channel is probably never going to get past what it is now. I've got about 300, I think, so not as big as it's going to get.
How many videos did you make?
So I'm not sure. I have to go back, but I recently got a notification that I've passed 30,000 views.
Oh,
So
that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's not too bad. I just do it part-time for the last couple years, so it's not bad. Now YouTube has taken a lot of my videos down and didn't tell me why. And somebody pointed out the other day, they're like, "What happened to half your video library?" And I'm like, "I have no idea. It's just gone." So, but I don't really care, right? It's just I just get on there to talk. It's good to be heard, you know.
Yeah, I mean, same here. I mean, I know that in order to really grow, I think you need to do like a more of a production and all that.
Yeah, it helps. It does help. Some channels alternate. They'll do live streams like this, but then they'll also make time to edit things and put in like video clips and stuff, and then they'll upload it. They do both.
Like when I watch the big channels, it's like they have an in-home studio,
Yeah.
really good mics, and they have editing.
Right.
All that combined, I think, makes people want to watch a channel.
Right. Now, the most profitable channels, from what I've seen, are the animated ones like Dark Matter 2525 channel. They make an ungodly amount of money, pun intended. Um, on their videos, because people like being entertained, right? They don't just want the material; they want to laugh with you, or whatever. So
Yeah,
it helps.
yeah, it's definitely a form of entertainment,
Absolutely.
and I don't consider myself an entertainer at all. So
Right, and that's perfectly fine. There's some channels which aren't, and they still do perfectly well. Apologia, for example, he doesn't really try to be funny most of the time. He just says what's on his mind, and that's perfectly fine too.
I watch him, and he's very straight. So yeah, he's not like entertaining, but he
Right,
does have some production. He has a
right.
good production
Well,
compared.
he got a head start on that because he was actually part of the graphics team, the creation studio team for Star Wars.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so he actually worked for George Lucas back in I think it was like the early 80s or something. So he had some experience to draw from. So by the time atheism became a thing to stream about, he already knew how to do all the editing and creation and stuff. So he didn't need to worry about it.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen him mention something about the past and being involved in some sort of filming.
Yeah, yeah.
You know. So
Right.
how long have you been an atheist, James?
Well, I would say that my primary deconversion happened about 12, 13 years ago, somewhere around there. And then um yeah, about 13 years. And then after that, it was kind of just in stages, right? I've gone through different stages of what I call my evolution of ideas. And so now I identify as atheist. And I say that because typically, if you say atheist, people conjure up this idea in their head about what an atheist is. And there's all these ideas, and I don't hold to all those ideas. So I don't know. I'm pretty nuanced about it. But yeah, I don't there's nothing that I call a god, right? And so by definition I'm an atheist. I just don't really care for the label too much. I'm all right with it, I guess. But like for example, when I look at Native American spiritual narratives, right? The idea that the there's a sentience, a presence to nature itself. The sky calls to them, the mountains call to them, the rivers call to them. They everything is sacred. I don't know that that stuff's literally true, but I see it as powerful and beautiful, right? Because it encourages a way of thinking and being in the world where they're more ethical in how they relate to nature, right? They take better care of animals, they take better care of the land and the water because they recognize that they're part of it and it's part of who they are and it's sacred to them. And I think that that's beautiful and it's productive. So a lot of times Christians, for example, when they feel like atheists are always just angry, we're not usually angry. Sometimes we are, we're usually not. They feel like the atheist is saying that they reject everything within a spiritual domain. And
Mm.
that might be true of some atheists. Aaron Ra is a good example. He rejects all of it. Whereas me, the only objections I bother to make to Christianity, for example, are the problems that hurt people, right? There are things within a church or within a religion that aren't harmful, and I separate those out. I'm like, well, this idea, and this idea, those are fine, cool with it, right? And then there's the other list of things that are harmful, and those are the things I have a problem with. And this is where the moral discussion comes in, because they are appealing to authority. The idea that might makes right. But there's this super father, this super parent, and they're thinking of it in terms of a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old doesn't know any better, so they have to rely on what the parent says. You set the boundaries. You can do this, you can't do that. Don't touch the hot stove. To a 5-year-old, they don't understand that it'll hurt them, but they trust the parent to know what's best. Now, if the child doubts that and they touch the stove, they get burned. Oh, now they understand whether or not it's supposed to touch the stove, right? And so that encourages a deeper level of trust in the parent even moving forward, because the parent has been proven right about the things. But the problem that comes with that is that some people develop such a deep sense of dependence on what the parent tells them, right, to set all their boundaries for them, all their rights and wrongs for them, that they never learn how to process things in a deep, rational way. They just take everything on faith. Dad knows what's best, right? And that's fine for a 5-year-old, but it's not fine for a 35-year-old. And this is where we get into disagreements about morality.
Yeah, and I mean, morality is something that when what I'm interested in is when Christians say, they ground their morality. They'll talk about that a lot. My morality as an atheist is, in their view, it seems like it's not grounded to them. It's almost meaningless, right?
Hmm.
I don't feel that way at all. Like, I don't think my morality is meaningless. Right. So that's kind of what I wanted. I was hoping some Christians pop in here because I want to understand why they feel like an atheist morality is like useless or ultimately useless. And I just don't see that. I mean, I live one life. I have a morality, that I've established, and it's good enough for me.
Right.
You know?
What's interesting, though, and hopefully you do get some Christians in here that will talk about it, but they don't really agree with each other, right? You'll have the presuppositionalists who have their deeply philosophical, special way of thinking about grounding everything. But then you have like the normal Christians who don't think like presuppers at all. They just think, that God is what makes people care about other people because God cares and he made people that care because he wanted people to care. And so people care because God makes them care. And so they're like, that's as deep as they get about grounding. And then there's other ones who simply don't even think about it that deeply. They just say, well, God's a nice guy. I'm a nice guy. God wants nice people to be nice to each other. Let's just be nice and get along. But those people look over at the atheist and say, hey, as long as the atheist is behaving well, right, as long as they're decent in how they treat other people and how they live in this world, then they're just as moral as the Christian. And their grounding is really the same because it's about giving a damn about how our actions affect other people, recognizing that we need to live in this, if we have to live in the same world together, it's better if everybody just gets along, right? It's better if everybody just plays nice. Because if we have a society where everybody does whatever they want to do, nobody's safe. And we all want to be safe. We want our children to be safe. We want our society to be safe. We want everybody to be healthy and maximally functional and cooperative. And so, with that being the case, it makes sense logically to play nice with each other. And a lot of Christians just think of it in very basic terms like that. And so they're going to pretty much agree with atheists on all the moral issues. It just depends on a Christian.
And that type of simplicity is kind of how I look at morality, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I think some of the Christians who get real deep in the grounding it to the Bible, they actually complicate it. It seems like very convoluted,
Well, sure.
I mean, morality to me is kind of easy, even in the Bible, I could relate to the golden rule, right? Mm-hmm. It's simple. I mean, I believe even children relate to that,
Yeah.
And that's really simple. And that's kind of my morality. It's kind of simple. I don't get overly into it. It's like if you're having a discussion with someone about what's right and wrong, and it's not in a forum like this or, in a debate or a deep philosophical discussion. I mean, you ask them something of what they think is right and wrong, and they don't go off into a lecture about grounding it in biblical principle. And, they're pretty much, oh, well, I think this is right and this is wrong, right? They don't go overly, you don't talk to someone and they talk about, well, subjective morality versus objective morality. People are just living their lives, right?
Right. That's most people, including most Christians.
Yes. I think most Christians just go about their life and, they have a morality that they've established and it works for them, hopefully. And that's kind of what I think. If it works for a person and they don't harm other people, they're pretty moral, they're moral in my eyes.
Sure. We each have a rational set of reasons available to us to behave well. Because if we live in a society where people just do whatever they want, then nobody is safe because people are just doing whatever they want. We just end up with roaming gangs, right? And nobody wants that, except maybe roaming gangs. Nobody else wants it.
Yeah.
And so, it's a practical necessity thing to say, hey, let's codify behaviors. Let's set out a list of rules where your rights begins and ends where mine begin and end, right? So your right to swing your arm wildly in the air ends at my nose, right? And it's the same kind of an idea where my rights as an individual are as broad and vast as they can be until they intrude upon somebody else's. As long as we each have an equitable amount of space and basic human rights, then we have an equal, balanced society where we maximize health, we maximize productivity, we maximize safety, right? That's the only way to do it, because if we have a society where different people have different rights, right, then we end up with a society where the people who have less rights are justifiably angry, right? And they're bucking against the system. And all kinds of injustices are happening because they've got less rights. And so they're not safe, and their children are not safe. Of course they don't want that. Of course they want their children to be safe and healthy and respected in the society in which they live, right? We don't need a super father in the sky in a hidden floating golden sky castle somewhere giving us lists of rules to live by when we're not 5 years old anymore, when more mature available reasons exist for why we should behave better towards each other.
Yeah, it's maturity, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just simple maturity. I
Right.
mean, you gotta try to get along with your fellow human beings, right?
Right. And when I look at the differences in the different religions, like for example, the Muslim will say that God doesn't want us to eat pork, right? And God doesn't want us to drink beer, and God doesn't, he's got this, God wants us to beat our wives if they misbehave, and they've got all these ideas about what morality is, and I don't agree with their morality. I don't think we need to hit our wives. I don't even think we should be hitting our children, but I definitely don't think we should be hitting our wives, and then and then calling that a loving relationship. And so, if they want to say that they don't think they're supposed to drink beer, my response is, okay, well, don't drink beer. I don't drink it because I don't like it. But if you think your imaginary parent doesn't like it, well, that's all right. Just long as you're not trying to force me or anybody else to live by that, I don't care. That's it.
Yeah, it's all common sense. It's another one is the Mormons with coffee. I don't know if you know they're like forbidden to drink coffee.
Oh yeah, coffee, caffeine in
That's like a
general.
big deal, right?
Right. Coffee and caffeinated sodas, I think too.
Yeah, I mean, I've met with Mormons who have knocked on my door and offered them coffee, and they're whoa.
You might as well been offering an orgy. No, we can't do that. What kind of disgusting reprobate are you offering us coffee? Oh my gosh. Right.
Yeah.
So that stuff just doesn't interest me. I mean, it's interesting in terms of an anthropology or social physics, things like that. Like, I'm interested in why people think the way that they do. But in terms of my moral considerations, they're not going to be able to make a coherent argument for why I shouldn't drink coffee, right? Nothing meaningful.
I know. Well, they will kind of back off a little and say, well, that's only for us,
Yeah.
Well, you're allowed to drink the coffee, but no, we aren't,
Right. Well, isn't that a great argument for why we shouldn't join the religion, right? Because we like coffee, and and their God doesn't even mind if we drink coffee unless we join the religion. Then he cares.
Yeah.
God.
Religion is really twisted. It never stops fascinating me.
Right. Right. And what I tell Christians is the same thing I tell Muslims, same things I tell Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Scientologists. I'm like, look, when you look around at the world and other people have different lived experiences, and you're telling other people that their religions are wrong, but nobody's allowed to tell you that yours is wrong, how does that work exactly? Right? Now, they say, because if I say to a Christian, I don't think that this particular, I don't think you're right to say that it's wrong to be lesbians, for example, just to pick an example. They say it's immoral to be a lesbian. And I'm like, well, what are you basing that on? because I don't think that a God would say that. And then they'll say, "How dare you judge God?" Right? And I'm like, I'm not judging a God. I am assessing what you say about a God. That's not the same thing as judging a God. When a Muslim comes to the Christian and says, "Oh, you're not allowed to have beer," and the Christian goes, "That doesn't sound like something a God would say." The Muslim can say, "How dare you judge God?" Right? But that doesn't forward the discussion. It's a thought-stopping exercise. It's a whatever we say, you're not allowed to think about it because the creator of the universe will get mad if you think about it. And I'm like, what do you do with that?
That's it. It's the freedom of thought where I think we find freedom in our mind and we can become more mentally stable. I mean, I kind of think religion will kind of stunt your mental growth because you close your mind off.
Right. In some ways, it does. Now, it can have a two-sided effect, right? So, religion, for example, somebody can feel like their God ordered the universe. He made the universe. And that can make them feel like they want to know more about science, for example, because they feel like that's how they're learning more about how God thinks and what God does, right? So they want to, fully bask in his creation by understanding his creation. And that can motivate them to take classes and get involved in science and learning. And so in this way, their religion is actually motivating them towards one avenue of development, but at the same time it's stunting other aspects of their development because it's stunting how they have relationships with other human beings, and it's stunting how they think rationally about moral issues, and they don't even realize that that's happening.
Well, let me ask you something, James,
Yeah.
because you know before you kind of stopped the religious thing, what religion were you participating in? A particular
So
group? Or...
generally speaking, I was Christian fundamentalist and Protestant. um, a lot of my ideas have been influenced by Jehovah's Witnesses. When my mom was a Jehovah's witness for a while when I was a teenager, and so even though I was never AJW, I did go out, door to door with them because they were trying to train me to be a JW. And I went to all the meetings. I participated. Everyone there at the Kingdom Hall assumed that I was a Jehovah's Witness because I talked their language. I acted like they acted, and they thought, "Oh well, what a godly young Jehovah's Witness guy this is." And I wasn't a JW. I was not convinced that it was true, but I thought it was in the ballpark of true. I thought that there must be a God. He must care. This seems like the truest religion that I'm aware of. Therefore, this is at least in the ballpark of true. And so I held on to this idea of that version of fundamentalism, more or less, not identical. There were some things I disagreed with them about, but generally I held on to their ideas until I was like age 41, I would say. Um, and then I realized it was all BS. What started that for me is I watched a Dark Matter 2525 video about Noah's Ark, about the flood, and realized at the end of that video that it can't be true. It literally can't be true. I'm not
Right.
right. I'm not saying that a God with unlimited powers couldn't do the things. I'm saying that if we think about it logically, we know he didn't do the things. And so with that being the case, I was like, damn, what else did they lie to me about? And because it was so obvious at that point that it wasn't true. And I'm like, man, how could something so obvious escape my attention? And then I really started doubting myself, which was the beginning of growth. Because before that, I wasn't doubting myself properly, which is what religion does to minds. It makes them overly confident in their own mental faculties, their own perceptions of the world and reality, their own logic. It makes them so overly confident that they're not busy questioning those things. And once I began to realize that I had been overestimating my knowledge, overestimating my reasoning, right? And then that made me humble enough to begin the process of reevaluating everything. So, the humility was in becoming an atheist. It wasn't in being a theist.
Yeah, I think I know that was one of the first things that came down in my religious experience. I mean, I was like a fundamentalist, born again Christian, and I believed, the Bible pretty much word for word, not literally word for word, but I guess thought for thought, concept for concept type of understanding.
Yeah.
And I realized that the book of Genesis just could not be true, you know?
Yeah.
So that was one of the first things for me. And then, that didn't make me not a Christian. It just was one, one pillar coming down.
Right.
And then another one came down and another one, because I think if you seek truth, you're going to question things,
Yep.
right? You're going to ask, is this literal, this Adam and Eve story, this Noah's Ark, did this really happen? And when you really start asking those questions, I think you could be on your way out, at least of fundamentalism,
Right.
And
Right.
Jehovah's Witnesses are definitely fundamentalists,
Oh yeah, they are.
Yeah. They're very similar to like a fundamentalist Christian that's not Jehovah's Witness in the way they see the Bible and stuff.
Right. Now, when I was still aligning with their ideas, generally speaking, I didn't realize just how similar they were to the other Christian religions. Looking back and seeing it from the outside looking in, it's obvious. They're almost identical except for on a few different issues, right? Their way of thinking is the same. And that includes the ugly parts, right? Like, for example, the Jehovah's Witness, if they come to your door and you're not interested or you're not impressed, then they walk away thinking, oh, what a morally inferior person that was.
Yeah.
Here we are offering them the truth of God, and that person is rejecting God. In the Jehovah's Witness mind, we've just rejected God just because we reject what they claim about a God, right? And they can't make the distinction. And the same is true for other fundamentalists. If they tell us what they believe and we aren't impressed or we aren't convinced or we're critical, then they'll say, oh, you're rejecting God. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm rejecting what you say about a God. Learn the difference, dude. And this is like one of the primary failings of religious fundamentalism.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, it's when you question a fundamentalist about, what they believe, it's like they look at it as you're really, trying to hurt them. It's like their identity.
Sure, identity politics, they are rooting their sense of who they are in the world and what they're worth in the grand scheme of things based on their relationship to a conceptualized entity. And so if they think my worthiness to even exist and in health is dependent upon my relationship to that entity, that means that Lou's worthiness to even exist or James's worthiness to even exist and in good health is dependent upon their relationship to the same entity. And because Lou and James don't have this relationship to that entity, that means that Lou and James don't really deserve to even exist. And this is one of the primary problems I have with fundamentalism, is the insult that's baked into that, not just for my sake, but my children's sake, to say that they don't deserve to exist. And one of these days, God's going to get around to taking care of that problem by taking out the trash that are my children, right? And throwing them away like the trash that they are forever. And I'm thinking, how can you say that shit with a straight face to somebody and be surprised when they just want to punch you in the face? Because what an awful thing, right? It's awful.
It is definitely awful. And it's terrible. Like it amazes me that they somehow think that's about love, It's
right.
So obviously not love.
Right. That's one of the reasons why I don't like to advocate for love anymore. Not in a general sense where the world needs more love. Because the problem with that word is that people pack their own ideas of love into it. And so if they have an abusive idea about what love is, and you say, let's be more loving, what they hear is, let's be more loving as defined by their religion, right? And that's not what we mean when we say more loving. We just mean stop hurting people and start helping people, right? But they think the most loving thing that they can do is to put God first and to put everybody else second. And a good example of that, Sam Harris made, he's like, look, if you look back at the beliefs of St. Augustine and Aquinas, right? Aquinas wanted to kill heretics. Augustine thought maybe you should torture them into repentance first and then kill them. And the reason for them thinking that way is, look, if there's something that your neighbor or even one of your own children can say to some of your other children, if there's something they can say or some way they can be in the world that leads your other children astray down a path of unrighteousness, right, down the path to hell, then we're talking about eternal damnation or eternal, consequence of any form. That makes your differently believing child or your differently believing neighbor more dangerous than a sexual predator, because the sexual predator can do a lot of harm in this life, but the person who has the wrong doctrines can do eternal harm to your children and to your family and to your community. That makes them even more dangerous in the grand scheme of things. And so what Augustine was arguing was that, look, the most loving thing we can do for society is to hunt and kill and even torture heretics, because then we're cleaning up the streets. We're removing wayward elements of people, because if your neighbor is a very loving person, that's actually bad in the context of that Christianity. Because if your neighbor is loving and decent and warm and kind, but they worship a different God, or they worship God incorrectly, etc., right? Or they're maybe gay or whatever, then your children might look to that example and say, oh, somebody can be a lovely person in the world and worship a different God, or worship God differently, or live and love differently, right? And then they end up with a way of thinking that the fundamentalist God doesn't approve of. Oh no, how dare you grow up thinking it's okay to be gay? How dare you grow up thinking it's okay to worship a different set of ideas or whatever? How dare you, right? And then he just destroys you forever if the Jehovah's Witnesses are right, or sends you to an eternal hell if mainstreamers are right. For what? For merely being influenced subtly but powerfully by a loving person you live next door to, or by a loving sibling. And so Augustine's reasoning was, do we need to kill these people? Because then we're minimizing the amount of people who end up in hell. And if we torture them into repentance before we kill them, then they might actually go to heaven too. It's a win for everybody, right? Right? That's how they reasoned.
I know. It's crazy thinking, though.
It is.
I know. With the Jehovah Witnesses, I had early experience with Jehovah's Witnesses, because the people who lived across the street from me were Jehovah's Witnesses when I grew up. And I became really close with the family. And the oldest son became like a best friend of mine. And he was Jehovah's Witness. He ended up being shunned by his family and all of the people who were part of the congregation, because he was gay. All right. Now, this is a long time ago. I don't know if they do this anymore.
They still do that, yeah.
It was a long time ago, and like, people really weren't out of the closet like they are today.
Sure.
But he was, I'm not gay, I'm straight like an arrow, right? But he was my best friend, and he was gay.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up killing himself, and part of it was the turmoil that he was going through, being told, he's not acceptable,
Right.
And
so
terrible.
Right. So being told that your very existence is somehow lesser than straight people's existence, and that you're, even though everybody's a sinner and falls short, that you fall further short, and in a way that just can't be ignored, right? And to be told that if you go out there and you find a relationship that's mutually loving and consenting and makes you happy, and it's outside of the boundaries of what you're allowed to do, that it means you've committed to a lifestyle, an identity that God doesn't approve of and is so disgusted by that he can hardly wait to violently destroy you and throw you away like trash forever. And your family's sitting around thinking about that, thinking, yeah, it makes sense. If I were God, I would violently destroy this person too and throw them away like trash forever, right? Because that's the religious proposition. Isn't just that God thinks the thing, It is also, and we, the religious people, agree with God. Yeah, we too want you destroyed forever or worse. And I'm just like, that's just so remote, not even remotely okay, right? It is not conducive to a healthy social system, a family, a community, a society, a world. It is a very unhealthy way of thinking and treating other people. And it doesn't really make any sense that a God would create people to be gay, right? If he's against it, then make it to where people don't accidentally end up gay, because nobody chooses to be gay, right? Nobody wakes up as a straight person one day and says, you know what? Just to piss off God, I think I'm going to start being gay. Like that's not a thing that happens. People accidentally end up being gay. They're not sure why they're gay. They just know that they are. What do you do now, right? Are they really supposed to go the rest of their lives feeling like a morally inferior individual compared to most people, and like they can't live their true self, and they can't be in a relationship that's mutual, consensual and loving, because it wouldn't be approved of by God? And just to tell them that, and trade for an IOU for happily ever after, an IOU that hasn't even been signed by God. It's just a theoretical IOU handed forward from rumors from a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy going back 2,000 years. And I'm like, that's not even an IOU. It's the rumor of an IOU that was never signed by God in the first place. And so that we get to live our lives in such a way where we harm ourselves perpetually in hopes that we'll be rewarded for it later. This is the only life we're sure to get. The only life we're sure to get. And we're going to completely trash on it for a God who, on behalf of a God who gave us that life in the first place. Why? It doesn't make any sense at all. Nothing in Bible says don't eat camel poop. Do you know why? Because nobody wants to eat camel poop, right? If a God can design humans such that it's guaranteed that none of them will ever need to be told, don't eat the camel poop, then a God, if he doesn't approve of homosexuality, can simply design the mind to not want to be gay. He can design the mind to not be gay. Right now, I'm not equating homosexuality with eating camel poop. My point is that if a God is equating those two, if a God is saying that both of those are disgusting and I don't want anybody doing it, why would a God design us to not want one and to want the other? It doesn't make any sense at all.
No. And I remember, this goes back, I'm 62, and my buddy killed himself when I was like 19 or 20. And I remember him because I grew up with him, from when I was younger. Very young. And he did not want to be gay. That was, because he knew that to be gay was something wrong, right? Because he was brought up Jehovah's Witness.
Right.
And he tried everything not to be gay. I remember him getting a girlfriend, and and he was like, look, I got a girlfriend, but it didn't matter. He was gay, right?
Right.
It's like, so eventually it came to a point where he came out, and that's when his family and everyone, the church or the congregation, I guess they call it, the Kingdom Hall, and everyone, they shunned him and would not talk to him anymore.
Right.
And it was terrible. It's a terrible thing.
He
really was a good guy. He was a good person.
Right. Another life destroyed by religion.
Yeah. And then, I'm sure it happens a lot, actually, mentally for some people, where they can't, they really do believe or want to believe in a God, and they want to believe that God, is perfect. And yet, the God doesn't accept a part of them, right?
Right. A big part of them.
Gay or something else,
Sure.
And having bad thoughts, right?
Right.
God doesn't approve of the thoughts you have. And it's like thought crime, right?
Sure.
Oh, I had a bad thought. Jesus had said, right, if you just think of a woman, with lust, you've already committed the adultery, right?
Right, which is quite hypocritical anyways. If you think about the three tests of that Satan supposedly gave him, He failed every one of those tests by that metric, because even though he didn't follow through on the actions that Satan tempted him with, he did feel in his heart a desire to do the actions. He thought about it. He felt about it. He had this other kind of feeling that he wasn't supposed to have. He just didn't act on it, right? So, if we say that it's committing adultery to even think lustfully, even for a moment, about a woman or anyone, right? Then that means that Jesus committed those same thought crimes every single test Satan gave him in the wilderness. He failed every single one of them, because even though he didn't act on it, he thought and felt about it, right? And so it's really hypocritical for Jesus in the stories to turn around and say, "Oh, but nobody else is allowed to have thoughts they're not supposed to have. I'm allowed to. You're not, right? I'm still perfect and you're flawed."
I never thought of that. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, like I never considered that Jesus taught, when he was being tempted, that he was indeed tempted, right?
Yeah, tempted in every way that we are.
Yeah.
No, he really felt it according to the story, and yet he's still considered perfect. And I'm like, how come he gets to do thought crimes and we don't? Come on now.
Yeah. It is so much contradictions and hypocrisy, and when you break it down, there's so much of it. It's hypocritical. It's contradictory.
Sure.
One part of the Bible says one thing and the other part says another. And yet, what is so fascinating to me is Christian people don't see that. They don't see the contradictions.
Yeah, they're
truly amazing.
Yeah, they're trained not to be able to see the contradictions. I mean, that's the magic of apologetics anyways, right?
Yeah, they're trying to rationalize these contradictions, right?
Right. I mean, you could
make them go away.
You can take any two statements which are not the same, like they don't agree, and you can make them agree by creating a story around the statements to where you reassign the meanings, right, to give it a new context, and now they're in harmony. You can do that with any two statements at all that you could even imagine, right? This is what apologetics does to make sure that their religion is unfalsifiable, right? Because you point out the contradictions, and then they create a story around the statements that recontextualizes everything, so that now they're not in contradiction anymore. Right. This is the magic, like when they take literal statements and make them into metaphors. Well, the power of the metaphor is that it can mean whatever you want it to mean.
Right. That's what is so, like, it's amazing how they rationalize, and they just literally just will stick with the belief at any expense, even when their rationalizations seem to fall apart, like the Old Testament versus the New Testament. I mean, that alone to me is extremely contradictory, right?
Sure.
It's, and like, it doesn't really match up.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Like I was talking to my girlfriend the other day, and she's Christian, but she's not really, she's not really one who, goes to church all the time, or puts her whole effort into this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very cultural Christian, right?
Yeah.
Which is fine with me, that doesn't make us not get along at all, because I accept her for the way she is, right? But she was asking me about, because I've read the Bible and she really hasn't. She's Spanish, and she was picking up the Bible the other day to start reading it in English, because she's bilingual, but Spanish first language. And she was asking, about the Old Testament, New Testament. And I'm just telling her what I know, not trying to be biased from an atheist perspective or anything, just trying to tell her, well, the basic story of what the Old Testament is doing, and then the basic story of Jesus, coming into the New Testament. And she was like, oh, so the God was different,
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I didn't really mean to say that, but yeah, I do think he was kind of different,
Right. So how I look at that, there's a Bible scholar named Francesca Stavroukopoulos, And she actually works at the same university as Dan McClellan. In fact, that's who helped him finish his education and helped him get the job. And you probably know who Dan McClellan is, right?
Yeah, I see him on YouTube, sure.
Right. And so what she points out in one of her interviews was a lot of people think that between the Old Testament and the New Testament, God went into some kind of anger management or therapy or something because he's like nicer in the New Testament. But what she points out is what you have in the Old Testament is God's very involved with people and he's very violent. But in the New Testament, he's gone. He's not there at all. It's just people talking about God, right? He's just gone. He doesn't hang out with us people anymore. He doesn't talk directly to us. He doesn't use his finger to write on the walls. He doesn't walk with people in the garden. He doesn't do the burning bush thing. He doesn't do any stuff anymore that he used to do. Even the priests, when they go into the temple, he doesn't have private conversations with them anymore and then them come out and tell people about it. None of that stuff happens in the New Testament. It's just people talking about their experiences, right? Now, Paul claims he had a direct personal relationship with Jesus, or experience, I should say, with Jesus. But for the most part, it's just people saying, and even that isn't really God, right? Because Trinitarianism took like a few centuries later to develop. So in the context of Paul's claimed vision, it's still not God talking to Paul. It's God's son, a human ascended into godhood of a sort, a lesser godhood of a sort, talking to Paul. So God's still not really there. It's just people who know God talking about God. And but it's interesting because there is, how I read this is, for the context of that cultural era at that time, Jesus was progressive compared to the norm, right? And so he's like, look, I still want us to keep the Mosaic law, but how about we try to interpret it in such a way where it's less legalistic, where it's a little bit more compassionate, it's a little bit less harsh, right? And we allow for common sense exceptions, right? If somebody needs to be healed on the Sabbath, or if you have a sheep that's stuck in a hole and need to get it out to work to free your sheep on the Sabbath, just do it. It's common sense exceptions, just do it. And then the Pharisees were like, no, you can't make exceptions. The law is the law. And so they have this conflict within the context of the story. But the point of Jesus, according to the stories, was he was born into Judaism as a religion, an organized religion. He was raised in that religion. He went to temple services, right? He was never rejecting religion. This is a common thing you hear from Christians, that Jesus' life and ministry was spent in rejection of organized religion. But that's not true. He was born into an organized religion. He was raised into that organized religion. And God's sitting back the whole time thinking, hey, no problem with that. And then as he graduated into adulthood, he took on that mantle of the organized religion. He started speaking only about Jews, only to Jews, for hope for the Jews. All he ever talked about. He never tried to replace Judaism with Christianity. Christianity is an idea that developed after he was gone. And so it's very important to make that distinction. Now, Jesus, being a pretty progressive-minded guy for the context, I kind of see him as a groomer, and I hate to use the word, but he's got this dad God guy, right? And now the dad God guy, the creator of the universe, or at least a creator, was an authoritarian, far-right, fascist a-hole, right? Jesus was not a far-right authoritarian a-hole, but he was trying to make peace with the God who is. And so he would lure people into his religious sect with the idea of progressive views and values in the context of progressive compared to where most people were at. But once they get in there, they find themselves worshiping a far-right fascist a-hole. And that's the kingdom that they're supposed to go into. So there's a contradiction there that people tend to just completely miss or ignore, is that Jesus wasn't a far-right authoritarian, but God is. And Jesus trying to be a bridge between humans and that God somehow. He never really works it out. He never really finds a way to harmonize those two sets of ideas. God remains a far-right authoritarian a-hole, and Jesus remains a fairly progressive, liberal-minded, hippie kind of a guy most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. And so, there's never really a reconciliation between those two ideas. But he never creates Christianity. That's not a thing until Paul comes along. So, when people talk about the difference between the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament, I think we can assume that the God of the New Testament is still thinking and feeling the same ways as he used to. It's just that Jesus disagrees, right? Jesus thinks dad's wrong. And this is why the Pharisees are mad at him. How can you say dad is wrong? And Jesus is like, well, yeah, no. Dad sent me to kind of do some damage control.
In a way, it's kind of like the son trying to make the father look better, right?
Yes, and in this way, it's very much like the father figure, the father deity, is a clinical narcissist, and the son is a flying monkey, and he's trying to do everything he can to make the dad look good despite the dad's failings. And so he represents dad as being not all that bad. And so people are supposed to ignore how dad actually is horrible.
But it never really does it. That's the thing. It's
right.
Like it's still this massive contradiction.
Right.
It doesn't solve it.
Right. He really doesn't solve the problem. In fact, he like, for example, when it came to slavery, Jesus said, in the context of the stories, now we don't know what the real guy said, but in the context of the stories, he says, slaves, obey your earthly masters. And then he uses slavery as an example, as a parallel, as a fitting parallel to the ideal relationship between humans and God, slavery. Yes. And I think that's really ugly and problematic to say that the best possible way to think of our relationship to God is as an abused slave and their master. And I'm like, I hope not. I hope not.
That's the thing that I've done a lot of thinking on slavery in the Bible, and it's totally clear that, God was okay with slavery, right? There's like no way around that, although they try to get around it. So they make attempts to get around it, but ultimately it all fails. I mean, you can't really get around what the Bible says, right? And
right.
The thing is that Jesus, the mentality of Christians is that they are a slave. It's like when Christians say, well, I'm free. It's really contradictory right there, because their whole idea is that they are a slave of Christ, right? A bond servant.
Right.
So they use the same language.
Yeah.
They don't run away from it. I'm a bond servant of Christ. Now, if you are a bond servant, you're a slave, right?
Sure.
I mean, how do you get around it? So just that model of slavery, right?
Right.
And trying to say there's a good slavery, which is that idea of a bond servant of Christ. Oh, I'm the good slave, right?
Right. So in order to be good,
it's still not good. It's still you have to, put yourself under the authority of a master. And when you do that and he has total control over you, it's slavery.
Sure. Now, the best way for them to salvage that is just to liken it to childhood instead, right? To just say, look, when you're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe even a little older, right? When you go to the park, and it's because it's a family outing, so the family takes you to the park, right? The dad's the one doing all the cooking, right? The parents bring all the materials. The parents drive you there. The parents have to go through all the stress of making food and setting the picnic table, keeping an eye on the kids, right? The parents are working their butt off, but the child, as a slave to the parents, if you think about it, but it's a necessary kind of slavery, right? Because they need to be dependent on the parents and trusting in the parents, because otherwise they're going to end up getting themselves hurt or kidnapped or whatever else. And so within that context, somebody could say, look, the child is free in the sense that they don't have to worry about a lot of the responsibilities that the parent has to worry about. The child could be carefree in that way. But the child is a slave in the sense that they don't really have the kind of freedoms the adult has. And so this is as close to being able to harmonize that as they could get. It was always a mistake for them to liken it to actual slavery or even bond servants, right? That was always a mistake. Now, the problem comes when we recognize that we're not children anymore, right. A loving parent. Now, all of us who have been a parent know that what a loving parent wants for their children is to see their children outgrow their child state dependencies, right? To learn how to think, independently and take responsibility for their own lives, for the good results and the bad results of their own decisions, to keep growing, to keep working through things, to keep struggling. You can still call your parent to ask them advice if you want to, right? But you're still responsible for the decisions that you make. A good parent wants to equip their child to be as capable as possible of being an autonomous adult in the world. They don't want their children to maintain those child state dependencies. However, failing to recognize that, Christians think that their God created them in such a way where all humans are incapable of reaching that level of autonomy or that maturity, and that it's somehow wrong to even try to. And so we should always be in this child state dependent to a father figure. And I'm like, I understand that different people have different limits and struggles. And there may well be some people who will always have a little bit more dependency on a parent than others. However, right, it's always a matter of encouraging the child to grow within the context of whatever their capabilities are, right? Being supportive, and just being there for them as much as you need to be, but not intentionally handicapping the child, right? Not telling the child, oh, you are by nature always going to be, somebody who's dependent on me in this way and that way. Therefore, don't even try to outgrow it. A good parent doesn't say that kind of thing to a child.
Absolutely. And that's, I look at my own children, right?
Yeah.
Not a perfect parent for sure. I tried my best, to bring them up correctly. They were kind of brought up. I have a boy and a girl. They were brought up a little differently, because of my changes, right?
Yeah.
But I want them, and they are, they grew up to be adults, right?
Right.
And as adults, I don't want them dependent on me for me to tell them what is right and wrong. I want them to have the ability to make those decisions on their own.
Right.
It's very, it would be very strange if they had to, come to me or their mother on everything that, they make a decision. They have to come to me or their mother and ask, what should I do? That would be a sign of immaturity, wouldn't it?
It would be. In fact, all of my adult children, even the son that lives with me, they are all morally independent, right? My son never comes to me and says, I don't know the difference between right and wrong. Can you tell me? Right? On any issue at all. They think about things. They read about things. They discuss things. He welcomes my input on some issues, but then he makes up his own mind. And he quite often disagrees with me on day-to-day stuff. And I don't mind that at all. I'm glad that he is his own person, that he can think for himself, even on moral and ethical and social issues. I'm glad, right? And I'm also glad that he's willing to make it open to discussion too sometimes.
Yeah,
and
there's a huge difference between asking, what your opinion is and asking for some advice. That's totally different than you are the master, right? That you dictate to them what they have to do.
Right.
And they, so growing up, wanting children to grow up. Yeah, I want my children to grow up. I'm glad they grew up. Right. I really am,
Right,
It'd be
right.
crazy if my son and daughter had to come to me to ask simple things. Well, you tell me what I should do now. You tell me what I need to do. I always say, well, this is I a lot would say this is what I would do.
Right.
You're your own man, your own woman.
Right. I would suggest that Christian parents could divide it that way too. They could say, look, here's this book, and I have found a lot of things in the book that are useful to me. There are some issues that help me gain clarity about, some issues that helped inspire me about, right? And some it's been a source of utility for me emotionally and socially and whatever other way, right? There's some stuff in here I found useful. Here's the book. I'm going to just make sure you learn how to read, right? That's what schooling is for. And I would encourage you to feel open to seeing if there's anything in here that you could use for your journey, right? That's a big difference than telling somebody, here's the book you're obligated to, learn it, understand it, and accept it as true. All of it as true. Find a way to make it all of it true, even if it doesn't seem to be true in parts. Find a way to make it true, right? Otherwise, the creator of the universe might feel personally offended and eternally punish you, right? That's not okay. Just say, hey, I like the book. I find good things in the book. I would encourage you to consider that something in here might be useful to you moving forward. And if the parent has a good relationship with the child, right, they're reasonably nurturing and intelligent and responsible and fair in how they deal with their child, and they're a reasonably respectable individual, then there's a good chance that that child will grow up thinking, well, my parent attributes some of their success as a human being to some things that they got from this book. I'm going to go ahead and look into it and see what I can find for me. They just logically, naturally would. And maybe they'll find nothing. Maybe they'll find something. Maybe they'll find a lot. Whatever. It's their journey, right? This is where I think parents could draw the line as Christians. I think it's very wrong to say you have to accept this stuff uncritically or else God will get mad at you.
Yeah, and that's another, thing I have with the religious mindset. It's like it's a mindset where you're not able to make any decisions on your own, even though you're an old man or a mature person, right?
Right. None that are morally relevant. Sure.
I lean not on my own understanding.
Right.
That proverb now, as a atheist or secular thinker, that proverb is awful.
Sure, it's incredibly problematic. If a super being were to poke their face through the clouds and echoed in a booming voice, I am the Lord thy God, right? And he said some things. Well, even I, as a rational skeptic, atheisty person, would look up and say, I think I might want to seriously think about what the giant face in the booming voice is saying, right? And I come to whatever conclusions I come to. But what I have is, it's just a book, written by some people and being interpreted by some people. And so, it's just people who heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from somebody going back 2,000 years. From people who claim to have had a private conversation with the creator of the universe when nobody else was around. And now you're supposed to hope that it got correctly translated forward and that they really did hear from the creator of the universe and that they just weren't making shit up or crazy. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with that except to find it unlikely.
Well, when you tell someone not to rely on their own understanding, aren't you telling them that, they just are not capable of thinking correctly?
Yeah, they can't trust.
Really weird to me.
Yeah, that they can't trust their own thoughts.
Yes, you're like telling them, well, you're not capable of thinking for yourself.
Right. If I'm not capable of thinking for myself, then how am I supposed to evaluate the contents of a book?
Right. And it brings you to that too, and there's that, it's just I'm so glad I don't live like that, anymore. You know what I mean? Because I don't see freedom in that at all.
No.
Like for me to be thinking I can't trust anything I think, right. Boy, that's pretty rough.
Right, at least on any morally relevant issues. And so what they really are telling us is, let me do your thinking for you. Right?
Yes.
Because that's what they're telling you. And that's not humble, that's not modest, and it's not socially equitable for some one adult to come to the next one as a morally superior person saying, I'm a better person than you, let me do your thinking for you. Otherwise, you're a shit human being and deserve to die. Right? That's the pitch. And I'm like, dude, get out of here with that.
Yeah. And that's where you get spiritual abuse comes into play.
Right.
A pastor, a priest, an elder, you have to go to them to tell you, what's right or wrong. And that becomes abusive, right? Because It's like, what did they tell you, could really be, they might have an agenda behind what they're telling you. right? And if you're that much of a slave mentality in your mind,
Right.
I mean, they can manipulate you beyond anything you ever thought was possible, right? Because
Sure.
you're just throwing yourself, into their thought pattern. So
Right.
they say this is the right way, and that's really frustrating to me. Like I was a salesman for many years, and I remember selling something to a Christian lady, and she said, "Well, I can't make any decisions without going to pastor."
Right.
I'm like,
Right.
this is not good.
No, it's not a healthy situation because there's like tiers, right? There's whatever plane you and I are living our life on. And then, somewhere below that tier are people that are maybe in an insane asylum or that are serving back-to-back 5 life sentences for all the bodies somebody found in their basement, right? Those people are probably less morally credible than you and me. But above that, so far above that, you can't even really see it, is God tier. Any voice which comes from that tier is considered perfect, and you better listen or else. The problem is that even if we humor the idea that a God tier for a God voice to come from exists, the only voice that we're actually hearing are human voices that claim to be speaking from the God tier. And so anybody that loans themselves to that idea, okay, I believe you, kind of a thing, well, now the words coming from the human effectively makes that human your God, because that's the tier they're speaking from. And so they can, so they get to speak on behalf of a God to say, this thing is right, this thing is wrong, this thing is right, this thing is wrong. Here's your priorities in life, here's your identity in life, here's what makes you valuable or not valuable in life, etc. And it's all coming from a dude, right? Just a sweaty, hairy, greasy dude that poops like everybody else. And probably somebody that I helped pass their remedial classes in high school, right? Somebody that rode the short bus, and now they're no offense to people with learning disabilities, don't get me wrong, but now these people are telling me that they got life figured out, and they're going to speak on this God tier over me about who I am in the world and how I'm supposed to be in the world. And as evidence for that, all they have is mental acrobatics and appeals to blind authority.
Yeah, and it becomes it very easily becomes an abusive situation.
Sure, because power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
And that's that whole spiritual abuse thing that goes on in churches.
Right.
And that's a real thing. And that really happens. People
hold on one second.
Used in that way,
we keep all the whole time we've been talking, and I love this conversation. We'll go up to 3 or 4 people, and then it'll drop down to 1, and the 1 is me because I got that tab open, and then it goes up to 3 or 4, and it drops down. I think people are assuming that because you're having a conversation with me, that's what this episode is. I want to encourage anybody who's here right now to know, if you want to have a discussion with Lou, click on the link. I will be happy to leave the stage, and you can have a discussion with Lou. Just letting you know.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like I said, I don't have much of a following, but I try to invite people of all different views.
Absolutely.
The whole morality thing has been on my mind over the last few days.
Yeah, I'm just keeping the ball rolling until a Christian shows up on the field to take over.
There's one. This guy, I've spoke with Rusty Shackelford.
All right. So you want me to get off here so you can talk to him?
Yeah, I'll talk to him. He's an athlete, which is really cool.
Awesome.
Football player.
All right, I'm going to jump out of here, and then I'll be listening.
All right, yeah, I'm going to get Rusty in here.
All righty.
Hey, Rusty.
Hey, Lou. I saw you on my feed again. I mainly just wanted to join on and listen.
Oh, well, I was talking to like another non-believer, so it was
just an agreeing conversation.
Yeah, a little bit different conversation. So, but
yeah, I was literally just sitting here finishing up some homework stuff, and
but yeah, I was telling him I was mentioning you're an athlete,
Oh yeah, that's right. Hey, I was literally in the weight room last time we were on the call, so that was pretty funny. Yeah.
Weightlifting.
You're right.
So my topic today is where do you get your morality from? You know,
Okay.
I mean, I know where I get mine from, but I'm wondering other people, right? Because I'm not so self-centered to think that, you know, my opinion is the only one that matters, right?
Right.
so,
Right.
so I like to know, you know, where people get their morality and how it affects, you know, their day in and day out type of living, you know.
Okay. You said you know where you got yours from.
I do, yeah.
I think we talked about morality a little bit, right?
I don't remember.
Last time I was on. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Because I know you were like on for like 7 hours talking
Oh
to
my
different people.
goodness,
So
yeah.
yeah. So oh, I guess then this. Where do you get yours from?
Well, I get mine from, you know, which I was talking to James about. It's for me, morality is quite simple, right? It's not that complicated, right? I look at each situation that I might be facing, and I look at it as either something I feel will be helpful to human beings or to harm human beings. So I don't want to do anything that would harm human beings, including myself. You know, it's not like I'm eliminated from that. I don't want to harm myself. And I also don't want to harm others. And I just look at it very simply for the most part. That's about it.
Is
So
like human value.
human well-being, you know, like I
Yeah.
would never want to do something that would hurt you, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and I, you know, that's it, along with the laws of the land, which I may or may not agree with, you know, but I'm bound by them, right?
Right.
So it's kind of twofold. It's I don't want to do something to harm other people or myself. I want consensual relationships. That's another aspect to it, right? If I'm manipulating someone to like do my will when it's against their well-being, that would be something bad to me, immoral,
Okay.
an immoral thing to do. All right, but that's it. So it's pretty simple.
So it's kind of like, you don't want to force people to do things and you don't want to, hurt somebody's well-being, right? So
Yeah,
so you're
that's
kind of like
pretty much it.
ascribing them that value in that way. And that's kind
And
of where you get the morality from.
yeah, and it's simple. I mean, that's like
Yeah.
I don't understand like Christians will tell me they have this morality that is dear to them. And I don't really understand what it is they have that I don't have, right?
Okay.
It's
No, yeah, 100% agree. Like with what you're saying, it's like you can think something is right and you can think something is right and wrong, and a Christian could think the same thing, right and wrong, right? But you could also think differently too. You could think something right is wrong, and somebody else could think something is right and wrong, and they'd be opposite.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but how do you determine what's truly right and wrong, though?
Just what I said. I just asked myself, is it something that harms another person or myself or not?
Okay.
And that's it. Now I could have bad judgment. I mean,
So you're ascribing the value?
just what is good for humanity, pretty much, you know,
Okay.
or another person, because usually it's involving a person rather
Right.
than a whole bunch of people, right? Like
And you're
if
giving
I'm
those people the value, right?
like if I'm doing business with you, right? I don't want to do business with you in a way that would harm you. So I wouldn't even want to sell you something that was a bad thing that I thought would hurt you, like maybe fentanyl, right?
Right.
I'm using an
Okay.
extreme, but you know what I'm saying? I don't want to sell you fentanyl
Right.
because
So I don't really want to
I
sell
know
people
that could
fentanyl either.
harm you, right? And
Right.
that would be a totally immoral thing for me to do. All right.
Right.
But if I'm going to sell you something that truly would benefit you and you consent and agree that it is beneficial, then I'm doing something moral, right?
Mm.
It's kind of like that.
Because
And I
you're
could
giving the
apply it
person
to
value, right?
any situation, really. You
Because
know,
you're giving the person value.
Oh, I value human beings. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, but you're giving them the value, and that's why.
Well, like anything. I mean, like stealing, right? I mean,
Right.
you could take anything that people might consider immoral, right? Oh, you shouldn't go steal from other people, right? Or a store, even stealing from a store. Now, a store isn't a person, but it's a business, right? And I would say if I were to go steal from a store, I'm harming that business. I'm doing something to hurt, that business. So I would generally think that is an immoral act.
Hmm. Yeah, I do too.
Little bit different with corporations, only in that you're not really harming a person necessarily, but it's a business, right?
Right, and it eventually and it would work its way through the system that you're messing up to, eventually harm somebody in some sort of way, right?
Yeah. So
Like the business owner who would have to deal with the consequences of you stealing from them, hypothetically. I'm
yeah,
not
yeah,
right.
yeah. And I mean, there probably can be some exception somewhere, but it's a very simple methodology for me to determine what is moral or not.
Oh, okay. It's just like so. Essentially, I just with what you've been saying, getting down to so I'm making my bed. I'm about to leave here in a little bit. Um, Essentially, what it comes down to is like, um, okay, you're saying, you know, people have this value. I don't want to harm people. So harming them is bad. So if I do something that would harm somebody, it's immoral. And then if it doesn't, it's moral. It's like
Yeah,
essentially.
if it causes no harm, then I would say it's moral. I mean, not necessarily, the epitome of morality, but
Right.
it's moral. It's okay to do.
Okay. It's just where is that value you're getting coming from, though? Like as an atheist.
I mean, most of it is just intuitive. It's common sense. It's not really something I would struggle with. I mean, I consider human beings someone that, human beings are of a concern of mine. That's all. It's not like,
It's not like true value. It's just like you think there's value.
I think there's value. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, philosophically, might be able to come up with some idea of a person that has no value, right?
Okay.
Think
Yeah.
of, Charles Manson or something, right? I could, but as a moral guide, it works.
Okay. So hypothetically, let's say I'm an atheist with you on here, and me and you are just agreeing, right?
Right.
Um, we would probably both intellectually agree upon the universe not being created by God and it just, somehow beginning, right?
Yeah.
And then whatever started that and whatever is happening eventually leads to us being around. And then, like, of course, that's just kind of an accident. And then our births are accidents and our deaths are accidents. And then everything in between those two accidents are just an accident. So, like, where does our value come from, though, truly? You know what I mean? If we're going to have morality, that's like, you know, it's objective, right? Objective is like moral absolutes.
I think objective morality can be debated. Like, I don't know that that's an absolute anyway, but
You don't think so?
I don't know. I haven't determined that for myself. Right?
Okay, yeah. I mean, like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was to say I haven't determined that for myself. I mean, I don't think it much matters for me, whether it's like I could see objective morality as being something that I base my morality on, and I'd say that's the objective part of it, right? But then I'm still going to analyze it and think, how does this fit into what, like I just gave you, what could be considered an objective morality? Things that are helpful to people are moral, things that harm people are immoral. That I could look at that as an objective morality.
But
Whether or not
the
it's
only
actually
problem,
objective is debatable, right?
I suppose, I mean, it is debatable in the way that, like, okay, if there is no God, there really can't be like moral absolutes. There really can't be objective morality. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing, Rusty.
But hey, I
It,
just want to let you know my real name is Eli, by the way. It's just my username.
like Elon Musk.
No, Eli, Eli.
Oh, Eli. Okay. Yeah, I just
I
see
wanted
it.
to say that last time. We just got off and I forgot to.
Yeah. Well, Eli, whether or not a God exists, if a God exists, fine. If not, fine. I still can have a morality based on something
But
concrete.
is that something true though? Is the only problem.
Well, I would say it's true. What my basis for morality, I think is true, of course.
Like people having value. You saying that's true without a God?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't see why, like to me, it's very extreme to swing out to this point where people have no value because you just don't believe in a God. I mean, if I thought that way, I guess I could be a pretty rotten person, right? Everyone I look at, well, you have no value.
Well, I mean, you don't have to think that way, but intellectually, you could still acknowledge that it's true because they weren't created. It was just kind of an accident of evolved cosmic soup.
And this is
Or
a
just
difference, I think, between Christians and non-Christians. Like, I think it really is a difference in how we think, right?
okay.
Like for you, it's very important to think that you were created, or there's this creator, and that's important for you, right? For me, it's just not even important. Like it doesn't matter. See, I will respect you if you're created or not. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. Whereas you might say, "Oh no, I need people to
No,
be
no, no,
created."
no. I'm not saying you don't respect anybody. I just or you wouldn't expect anybody if you believe that way. I'm just saying, like intellectually, on a deeper note, you would have to acknowledge that it was true that we we're not really intrinsically valuable
Well,
without a God. You know what I
I
mean?
think for morality, um, you don't have to believe in an objective morality as compared to a subjective morality to be a moral person. I don't see that really makes much of a difference. All right. Now, of course, we probably both trying to find truth. I know I am. I spend my life trying to seek out what I think is true.
Right.
Right. But that's not going to affect my morality necessarily. And, I
So,
mean,
I mean,
atheists, secular humanists, Hindus, Jewish people, Muslim people, Christian people all have a sense of morality, whatever, regardless of what they believe, right? You don't have to believe a particular thing in order to have a sense of morality.
yeah, I'm just, but so, okay. So when you would say that, you would say that other people's morality could be just as right as others. Like like me and your morality, like I'm sorry, mine and your morality would be equally as valid as Hitler's. Because I would argue that's not the case.
Well, I don't think Hitler's morality, given the fact that he, did this, mass extermination of people, would be a good example,
Yeah, I know, it's not a good example as far as like, if we want to compare what we think is good, but if we're going to acknowledge, if we're going to say there is no God, we have to acknowledge that, all morality, both sides of whatever we believe is equally valid. You know what I mean?
No, that's where we just disagree. Like
Okay.
I think there's morality. Morality is a real thing. I don't think it's fake. All right. Whether it's subjective or objective, it's still not fake. All right. We do subjective things every day. All right. That doesn't mean they're necessarily, wrong. It's just everything we do is not objective, right? Everything we do in our day-to-day lives is not based on objective reality. I mean, we make decisions sometimes that are just subjective. Like if you use your intuition as an example, right? If you were going to make a decision on your life
Okay.
and then you're contemplating it, right? And
Right.
you're not sure, which direction to go in, but you have to make a decision by tomorrow at 12 o'clock. All right. And you might just think about it and intuitively come up with something and head in a direction. All right. That doesn't mean it was objectively the perfect direction. It's just it subjectively was the right decision for you. You used your intuition and
So
you
you're saying
decided.
morality is subjective on an individual level?
I think it can be either or. That you could have an objective morality or a subjective morality, and either way, it's not that meaningfully different. It's not that different, right?
Okay. But
So
I would say for me as an individual, gassing Jews is wrong. And Hitler may say, okay, as an individual, gassing Jews is right. I would say that's meaningfully different.
yeah, but that's compared to Hitler.
Yeah,
What
another
about you?
individual.
What about you and I? Like, what is it you think you do that's more moral than what I would do?
I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If I compare my morality to Hitler, I think it's pretty easy for me to say my morality is superior to Hitler's.
Hitler could say the same thing about you
But
if
it
Hitler
doesn't
were
matter.
around and you were around, because as an individual, you said individuals could have different morality. He could say that about you,
And
just like
that's
you could
fine.
say that about him.
And we could do that whether you have a concept of objective morality or not. We could still do that. Right? Like Hitler seemed to be, again, I think we might have talked about Hitler. I mean, it seems to be like he was more Christian than non-Christian. And he didn't seem to be atheist as far as I know. I mean, he did have like a belief growing up as a kid, all right, and he had a relationship with Catholicism, right? So he wasn't like an atheist. And we see people who do horrible things that are Christians, and I'm not blaming it on their Christianity.
Okay,
That's
good.
not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But you must admit there are Christians who do very bad things, right?
Sure. Yeah. Just
Oh,
Christian
it's not their
doesn't.
Christianity to blame, right?
I'm sorry.
It's not their Christianity that's to blame for that.
No.
All right.
See,
So
I could
there
be
could
a
be an
Christian
atheist.
and totally not follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, right? Or I can be a
could be
Christian and still do morally wrong things.
yes.
Yeah. Christianity, I don't. For me, I don't put my faith in Christianity. I put my faith in Jesus Christ. But as far as just morality goes, I think if there is no God, then there's no mind before the human mind to make morality. Thus, humans made morality, and so it's just relative. And if we want to say that our way of thinking is better than somebody else's, I mean, you can say that, but what's the basis? You know what I mean?
Well, you do. I know you would agree that we're free agents, right? I mean, we create and make decisions on our own, right?
So, and if there is no God, we wouldn't. But I know last time when we were talking, I asked you about free will, and you said, I don't mean to. Uh, I'm sorry. What you said, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the simple answer you gave me is, I don't know. You said there were some
Yeah,
atheists who believes like, yeah, we do have free will. Some atheists believe
yeah,
we don't. You just said,
yeah,
I don't know yet. So,
yeah. I haven't made a definitive conclusion on that, but
okay.
I
But
readily admit that I live my life every day as though I have free will, for
right.
sure. All right.
Okay.
Like I never live my life thinking, oh, gee, I don't have free will. I always live my life in accordance to the idea that I actually do have free will. Because whether we have free will or not, this is what I'm talking about. This will illustrate what I'm at least trying to communicate, right? Whether or not I believe I have free will or not is more of a philosophical question. But every day in practicality, I'm still living my life as though I have free will, right?
Okay.
Because how could I not, right? I mean, I
Yeah. I
still,
mean,
you know,
I feel like I have free will. I know feel
that's
like
what I'm
you have
saying.
free will. I
Whether
would
we
say we
do or
don't.
don't, we're
But
still living our lives.
if I think about it, like to be honest, I would have to say if there is no God, we don't have free will. You know what I mean?
Well, my point is the free
And that
will
we can't
question.
have free will if there is no God. It wouldn't be true free
The
will.
free will question is a philosophical one. It's not really practically something that's going to impact our lives on a day in, day out basis, at least not my life. And the subjective morality versus objective morality is to me the same thing. It's a philosophical question, but in our lives, it doesn't really much matter, right?
I mean,
Because, and what I would use to prove that point is Christians believe in objective morality. I haven't met one yet that says they don't believe in that, but they still do the same sins as anybody else. So, in practicality, it just doesn't much matter, right? Whether they think their morality is objective or subjective doesn't matter. And, you know, doesn't play out in any way that matters that I could see.
okay. So you're saying you don't think it matters if there's
No,
objective morality or not.
no, no, because I could say I don't believe in objective morality, and that's where I stand on the issue, and I could still be a moral person.
So I think I brought this up last time. So the Nazi officers in Auschwitz who were just following orders, they you'd been fine with that? You'd have left it there. You don't think they were doing anything wrong because they were following orders?
No, and I think they were doing something wrong.
Okay, so you do think they were doing something wrong.
Absolutely.
Like,
But I could base that on my own subjective morality. I mean, I don't have to have this absolute thing. All right? Because I could be not into objective morality at all and I could still say that they're doing something wrong because my subjective morality might tell me that it's wrong.
so you think it's just wrong because you think it's wrong. You're saying there's no real, like, it's not really truly wrong. Like what Hitler. So essentially, what you're saying is Hitler gassing Jews is not absolutely wrong. It's just relatively wrong.
No, I mean, this is where I think you get caught up in this. All right. Um, I think gassing Jews was wrong. Okay.
Right.
Now, whether or not I say, well, it's wrong because a God told me it's wrong, all right, or I say it's wrong because it harms other people, which is my criteria, all right, we both could say it's wrong. The reason we say it's wrong could differ, right? It could be different, all right? But we both agree it's wrong.
I'm not saying it's
Ultimately,
like what we say or what we think. I'm saying overall, is it absolutely wrong? No matter who you are, like what you think, is gassing Jews wrong?
with my criteria, which I told you specifically what it was, yes, it is absolutely wrong because
Okay.
he absolutely was harming human beings.
Okay.
And so by that
But
criteria,
but you're saying harming human beings, you're ascribing them value where the value is just coming from what you're saying though. Again, and that just circles us right back to relativism.
well, I mean, I don't have to ascribe value to a person only because of a God. I mean, I can ascribe value to the person regardless of a God because it's me ascribing the value to them. I don't need a God to tell me that person is valuable. All right. That person has value. I could do that on my own, and I do. So
Right. And
I
then
don't see
somebody else could
where
do something on their own too. And they think the complete opposite of you because there's no higher absolute. It's just what individuals think. You know what I mean?
yeah, so what?
I'm just, yeah. No, hey, and Lou, thanks again for having me on. I just want to emphasize, I think I emphasized this last time. I don't want to be just sitting here arguing with you the whole time. I just like to have, conversations.
No, I think it's a very interesting conversation. And I think this conversation actually gets down to the difference of how, let's say, a Christian might think of something and a secular humanist atheist might think of something. All right. It's definitely a difference. All right. My point to you is I don't see it having a practical application where one is better than the other. That's all I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah.
I have my way of determining morality. You have your way of determining morality.
And you said yours was just for practical application?
That's how I do it. I mean,
Okay.
I told you what. Now I could
So
argue.
gassing Jews becomes convenient. I don't know. Let's just say hypothetically, it could be right.
No, because I have a criteria that I'm using.
And as long as you follow that criteria that
I'm cool.
You created, you're a guy.
I'm giving a criteria. Some might say that's my objective morality, and that gets philosophical because some may say, oh, no, that's not objective morality. All right. Some may say it's subjective. And the bottom line is it doesn't matter if they say it's objective or subjective. I have a criteria, and my criteria is, does it harm other human beings? That's it. So what Hitler did was wrong to me, whether it was objective or subjective. It's not it is completely something I'm doing. I have a methodology to my morality.
Yeah.
Right? And my methodology says that was wrong. Definitively in my methodology.
Okay. So now, in that, so you're saying he's wrong because he was harming the Jews, right? And harming people is wrong?
Yeah. That's
okay.
Simple.
Yeah. And in that methodology, you're ascribing them the value. I just want to get that one.
Yeah, and I've told you, yeah, I value human beings.
Okay. So
and they were people of value because I'm giving them that value. I don't need a God to give them that value. I, as a human being, am giving them that value.
Okay. And then somebody else could just not give them that value, and that's just valid, right? That's equally valid.
No, it's not equally valid to me. But
to you, yeah. So
but
to you,
people,
so it is relative.
But people can have their own views. That's just reality,
right?
So I could only speak for myself in terms of morality because I could talk to someone who has a different morality than me. All right.
Right. But would you say their morality is different just because it's different? Or would you say theirs is wrong because it's different? Would you say theirs is wrong if they believe that gas and juice is okay?
Yes, because it goes against my standard. All right.
But
Now
ultimately, your standard.
could I say beyond that? No, but I don't need to. I could only offer what I think, right? I'm offering what I think. I'm not offering an absolute. All right. You can say, well, I'm offering an absolute, but what's the difference? It's just you're just a man like I'm a man.
Correct.
You know, whether or not you think something is moral or immoral versus me, what I'm doing, we're both agents. We operating in the world, and we're gonna have the impact that we have in this world. You know, it's just gonna be what it's gonna be. You know,
It's going to be what it's going to be. So it's like, it's really okay if everyone acknowledges, if they're going to be honest and intellectual, if they don't believe there's a God, if they're going to be completely honest, they're going to believe that their morality truly, and realistically doesn't actually matter. It's just a whatever they kind of thing. So really they could change it. They could do whatever. It doesn't really matter. Whatever they believe, nothing wrong or right about it. It's just sad to believe out.
On an individual level,
right?
So we're talking about one person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What one person thinks about whether there's a God giving them this morality, or themselves giving them this morality, right? Or another God giving them this morality. Whatever they're thinking is what they're going to think. All right. So they're going to act in according to the standards that they gave themselves.
Right.
You don't see that?
And all I'm saying is if someone's standard is saying it's okay to walk into a Burger King and, with a Glock and shoot up a bunch of kids, if that's their standard of good, I'm going to say, no, that's not good. That's absolutely wrong. Not just because I think so on an individual level. I'm going to say that's wrong because it's wrong to shoot up and murder children in a Burger King.
And I stand with you on that. You see what I'm saying?
You don't. I mean, you stand with me that it's wrong, but you don't stand with me that it's overall not on an individual level, but an overall absolute wrong.
Well, I stand with you on an individual level for sure, right?
Okay.
You can see that.
Right, of course.
So on an individual level, of course, we stand in agreement. Society also, not just me, but millions and millions of other people also stand with both of us on that.
Right.
So we have many Christians would stand on that. Many atheists would stand on that. All right. But we are just individuals. And as a group, we form a society. Right. And that's about it. It's not that different. I mean, are there going to be people who disagree with you and me? Yeah. There'll probably be some people, very rare. They're going to be outcast type people. Like there could be Christians who would disagree with that. There can be atheists who disagree with that.
I would say they're wrong if they disagree with us.
Me too. It's just the reason we think it's wrong is different. That's all.
So yours is just because society decides it as a collective group, and mine's because there's a God ascribing human beings value because they're made in the image of God and they have intrinsic value. That's right.
You have your reason to think it's immoral to do that. I have my reason to think it's immoral to do that. And society also has its collective reason to think it's wrong to do that.
Okay. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So, my reason, I would be because I believe there's a God that created us and he's given us innate intrinsic value. Okay. Because we're made in the image of him. And your reason would be because you ascribe the people value and society has ascribed value and morality based on like a collective idea, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens? Let's just say hypothetically, society was to change over the next decade to say that, walking into a Burger King and shooting a bunch of children is completely okay. Does that make it okay?
Not for me, because I have that criteria I already gave you. That's my personal criteria.
Okay, so not
That
for
would
you,
go
but for that
against.
society and the people later on, that would be okay.
No, there's society's morality, right, that we live in, and
Mhm.
then there's a personal morality. They're two different things. All right. So society can go off the deep end and have, a bizarre view of morality, but I still can hold to my own morality in my own personal life. And that's the same for you. I mean, the society can go, let's say, non-Christian, right? Let's say society goes completely secular and your Christian worldview becomes a very small minority, right? Just imagine that. But you could still hold on to your Christian morality on a personal level,
Mhm.
but the society around you would be changing. And it's the same thing for me. I have a standard. Does it harm people or not? And society may turn and say, oh, no, no, no. We do now think that's acceptable, but I still hold on to my personal morality. There's no difference. You're the same way. Okay. It's just, you just attach a God to it. That's it. All right. But in practice, in our lives, it pretty much doesn't seem to matter to me. All right?
Okay. So I would argue, if there is no God, then there's no mind before the human mind. We've made morality, and what we perceive to be morality and our free will is pretty much just complex biochemical reactions. It's not really us making the decisions or anything, if there is no God.
Again, I know this is going to drive you nuts, but so what? it doesn't matter, because I'm still in my day-to-day life going to live my life according to the values that I have and according to the standards that I have for myself in my life. It doesn't matter. Uh,
Right. Yeah. Because and in that you're saying essentially that overall, like, your morality doesn't absolutely matter
my morality absolutely matters to me.
to you. So
Yeah, just
it
like your
relatively matters.
morality absolutely matters to you. There really isn't. I don't know. Why is this big difference? It's really not. All right,
Well, there's
your
not a big
morality
difference.
matters to you.
There's not a big difference, and I think you would agree. There's not a big difference in me and you both thinking that Hitler gassing Jews is wrong, but there is a big difference in the way that you think it's relatively wrong, and I think it's absolutely wrong. And I don't think it's absolutely wrong because I think it is. I just know it's absolutely wrong. And you're saying
Okay.
you're
Okay. Now let's go with that. Right.
okay.
So say, all right, you know that this is absolutely wrong. Okay. What does it really matter in the functionality of your life as compared to my life? What does it
What do you mean?
really matter? I mean, I'm not talking about philosophy. I'm talking about in a day in and day out basis in your life. You formed a morality. It's based on the values that you have, right? And you're hopefully going to live it out because you want to live it out. There's no difference in my life. It's the same thing. Right? It's just that you attribute it to a different source, right? You have a different reason that you believe in certain morality. I have a different reason I believe in a morality, but in day in daily life, it's still essentially the same. For us, for you, it's
Yeah.
the same.
I
For me,
mean,
it's the same.
we both believe that people have value, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just describing mine, to God, saying God has
Yes.
given us innate
That's
intrinsic value.
now you
And
get it.
you're ascribing it just from yourself. So
You
it's
got it. There is a difference, but the difference isn't really that much of an issue on a day in and day out basis.
no,
All
I mean,
right.
I've got it from the beginning. I understood. It's just that,
Yeah.
yours is very subject to change and yours is only on an individual level.
Well, like like when you speak to people
Right.
about making decisions that may be moral or immoral, right?
Right.
And they're just regular human beings, right? They're not philosophers, they're not theologians, they're just regular folk, right?
Right.
Do you usually, let's say you ask them about making a decision on getting married or not, or something like that, right? Do you normally encounter people that say, oh, well, let me think if this is subjectively okay or objectively okay? No, that's not something people generally do. They just, a lot of it is intuitive. They go, oh, I just feel that that's the right thing to do.
Okay.
Right? And that's not going to change whether you're Christian or not Christian. Do you get it?
Well, yeah, I would argue whether I, believe in God or don't believe in God, that immorality is not going to change. It's just that, do I believe it's absolute, or do I think it's just whatever?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I understand the difference of thinking it is absolute and thinking it's not absolute. My whole point to you is just that one aspect of, you should try to understand that when you're talking to someone who doesn't believe in God, it doesn't really matter to them because they're still operating from some framework of morality, unless they
Okay.
are completely off the deep end, right? And they're just insane and all that, which exists. We both know that exists, but
But
that's an outlier.
if they were just crazy with their morality beliefs, I mean, if there is no God and the way you believe, you would still have to acknowledge that their morality is equally valid in an overall aspect.
No, I don't. I could say it's totally wrong,
You
but
can say it's totally wrong, but you still have to acknowledge that what you think is just in your own mind.
I have my standard, which I told you is, if they're harming other human beings, to me, that is completely wrong. Now, in
Yeah,
their
you have your
mind,
own standard, but somebody else could have their own standard, which would be
and they
different.
do. That's what I'm trying to show you. They do.
Okay, yeah,
If
and they do. And if there is no God, then they're just as true as you are, and you're acknowledging that.
Nope, because I still have a standard. The standard doesn't have to be a
Well, I
God.
know you have your standard. Yours is yours, but I mean, you do acknowledge that theirs is just as valid, right?
No, I don't.
If there is no
I would
God,
not say that, because I don't think that. What I do think, and this is how to maybe understand what I'm saying, I do think that in their mind, because they are also an agent in this world, they might disagree with me. I would say that, but I'm not going to acknowledge that their crazy ideas are as good as mine or as moral as mine, because I have a standard. I have a standard I live by. Right. And their standard can be different, just like you have a standard you live by, and their standard could be different. There's no difference. It's the same thing. When it plays out, it's the same thing.
so you're acknowledging that the standard is different, but you're only accepting your morality.
I have a standard of morality.
Okay.
Right.
So would
I
you
am the
say
one who lives by that. Right. I live by my standard of morality. At least I make an attempt to, and I try to, right? You have a standard of morality, and you attempt and try to live by your standard of morality. That's the same. There's no difference in that. We're both human beings. We're both living according to a standard that we've established for ourselves. There could be other people who do not have the same standard of you or I, and they might think it's okay to gas Jews. All right. Whether or not I say it's wrong or you say it's wrong, ultimately they're free agents and they're going to do what they're going to do. That's what I mean by playing
so?
out.
You do believe they have free will?
Like I said, I think they have free will in a day-to-day way. Yeah. Philosophically, there's another discussion to be had. There's another debate to be had. All right. But again, that's a debate that just doesn't matter in everyday life. It just doesn't really matter. And what I think about free will philosophically doesn't change the fact that every day I go out and act as though I have a free will.
Okay.
You know, I've never met someone who acted as though they had no free will. Right? And yet I talk to people who say philosophically they don't think they have a free will. But they're still acting as though they do. Do you see that?
I'm sorry. Say that that last part one more time.
Think about this. Tell me if you agree.
Okay.
There are people out there that will argue philosophically that we have no free will. Those very same people are living day to day as though they have a free will. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so we agree on that.
Yeah, you can argue that you can argue something and then live your life out, another way.
Well, no, I don't think they have. I don't think they have much of a choice in that. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how you would live out your life thinking you have no free will. It'd be very odd to me, like how you would even go about doing that, right?
So let's say we do have free will. If we think walking into a Burger King and shooting people is wrong, and somebody else thinks it's right, how do we determine above an individual level whether it is truly right or wrong?
Starts individual is one thing, society is another.
Okay.
So it's kind of like twofold, because what I think may not be the law of the land. It may not be what a society thinks, but it does apply to me as an individual. So then we have above me is we have a group of people, and that is what I would call a society.
Right. So what if society is the opposite of what you think? What if society thinks that walking into a Burger King and shooting people is good? Somebody does it.
We have a total, then I am counter society. That doesn't take my criteria away, because I'm still an individual and I still have my criteria. It's like what I said to you before. What if the society went completely non-Christian, right? They went away from Christianity. That doesn't mean that it's taking your criteria away on a personal level.
So, but in that you are saying that it is just relative, because it is just you on an individual level deciding what's right and wrong.
I do decide what's right or wrong on an individual level.
I know. I'm just saying, are you agreeing with me that you believe it's relative?
Well, it's relative in
Because there's
certain
nothing
ways.
above what us as human beings decide.
I don't think there's anyone above us deciding that. No.
Okay.
And
that's pretty much what I'm getting to.
Now again, that's a philosophical question. All right. And it can be answered differently by different people. All right. But ultimately, the answer to that philosophical question doesn't matter in any real way. It only matters if you want it. If you make an issue of it, it does. But it's more like a mental game, I mean, whether or not I think there's a God above me who is giving these rules, or whether I don't, I mean, I'm still acting on my own criteria. All right, let me give you one thought, Rusty.
Okay.
Eli. Let me give you, I keep reading your name. Let me give you one thought, Eli. Okay. When we talk about subjective morality and objective morality,
okay,
right? I think we probably agree what that means. Probably, right? One is an absolute,
Right.
And it doesn't matter if a person is involved, right? Doesn't matter, right? It's beyond you and I. We're people, we're persons. I technically they would say we're subjects, right? So you could have your opinion, I could have my opinion. And if it's objective, it means it's beyond what you think and what I think, right?
Right. And
Now,
I would argue morality is objective.
Right. So you have something that is solid, right?
Okay.
That cannot be questioned, right? I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah,
It's
objective
solid.
morality. Yeah.
It's something that you can count on. It's concrete.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, like, Hitler gassing Jews is questionably right or wrong. I'm just going with, yeah, that's absolutely wrong.
Me too. But I'm saying that the idea of objective or subjective morality, one is based on a subject, a person, right, who's making decisions. Another is supposed to be outside of the people, right? It's objective. It is perfect regardless. Do you see that?
I'm sorry, say that part one more time.
In objective morality, it should be a morality that is beyond persons.
Yes.
Okay.
Like,
so
God.
Yeah. But tell me if you could follow this. God is a person, or you don't think he's a person? Because I think
he's a personal being. Yes.
All right. So he is giving you his own subjective morality because he's a person. He has a mind, like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
He is a person and he has a mind. So he's giving you his own thoughts, which is subjective. If I were a god, I'd be giving my subjective morality to people. It's not objective unless.
But that would be objective to us.
Yes, it's objective to you.
Right? To everyone.
Well,
you can say that God is the only one outside of us. So I guess you could say, yeah, that's subjective from his perspective, but it would still be objective for all of us. And Hitler gassing Jews is absolutely wrong.
Yes.
Okay, and not just because, you think it is and you're ascribing them the value, but because God ascribes all of us value.
Yes.
So I'm not saying, Hitler gassing Jews is wrong because I think Jews are valuable. Because I could say, I think it's okay because I don't think Jews are valuable. I think it's wrong because God ascribes all of us value.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But you think it's wrong because a person, God, a being, right? He's not a force, right? He's not an energy. He's a person. I think we agree on that. So I want to make sure. Because
he's a spiritual being, yes.
Yeah. So a spiritual being told you it was wrong. Okay. That spiritual being at his level is making a subjective process and giving you what you must take as objectively true.
Yeah.
All right. So it's the same thing
I'm doing. Perspective is all good.
Okay. I'm doing the same thing. I'm saying I have what I go through to decide what is moral. And my standard is one that doesn't harm human beings or not. We're doing the same thing. Okay. You're just attributing it to a person. That's it.
I've been aware the whole time that we're doing the same thing. I'm attributing to God giving us all value, and yours is just coming from you giving the value.
Yeah, and I recognize that, and my counter to that is it doesn't matter because we're still giving value to what we hold dear to. We're still doing the same thing.
I can agree that we're doing the same thing, but I don't agree that it doesn't matter, because if it were just me ascribing the value, I would have to accept that whatever somebody else is reasons for morality is just equally valid because they're ascribing whatever they want to. You know what I mean? But if there is a God, he ascribes us all value. You know what I mean?
Well,
Then we can have absolutes.
I gotta bring this up because
Okay.
when I run into considering that the God of the Bible is this absolute morality, right? When I run into that, thinking, trying to go that way, right? I throw myself trying to get there, right? So I go, well, now if there was a God and he was the Christian God, all right, what would I do as an individual to decide what is moral? So I'm going to throw that at you. You're a Christian. What is it you do to decide what is moral in your life? What is it you do?
Well, I mean, it's kind of what you do, except I'm ascribing God to it.
Well, give me an example of how it could play out. Just one example. Like if you were making a decision on something that you would consider in the moral, ethical world, in that area.
Well, I'm going to be following the teachings of Jesus Christ for one. And then if I believe there's a God and I believe that, people have value because God created them, it's kind of the same thing where you do, except mine's just, I have the value. Everybody has the value because God made them.
Okay. 10 commandments, because I'm interested in this thing. 10 commandments, right? We know what they are, right? Whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, you could pick up the book and read it, right? It tells you what they are. Okay. Take the very first commandment. Okay. The very first commandment is love the Lord your God, or don't put other gods before me. God is saying that, right?
Right.
So he's saying, you do not put other gods before me.
Hey, and Luke, I just want to thank you again for having me on. I'm going to have to get off here in just like a little few minutes because I got to go do some stuff. Again, thank you.
One last quick thing.
For sure.
So that would be, if you disobey that would be immoral, correct?
Yes.
Okay. As a country in America, do you think it would be proper for us to say that you must put Yahweh first? And if you don't do that, you're an immoral person?
No, because God gives us a free will in order for us to choose him. So I don't think, the United States as a whole telling somebody they have to believe in God is right. But God ascribes us free will in order to now for that person to choose, God or choose another God or not God or whatever the case may be, that would be wrong.
Because there's a lot of things that God did and said that we would normally think are immoral, right? Or no? You think everything God did and said was moral?
Like what?
Slavery in the Bible.
Okay.
I mean, there's lots of things. I mean, killing entire cultures, genocide. Book of Samuel. There's a genocide where God tells people to kill the babies, the mothers, the infants, the animals. We would generally consider that immoral, even in wartime. There's
a lot of stuff that gets exaggerated in the Bible. You know what I mean? Because those people groups that are written down, hey, we're going to go destroy them completely. They end up showing back up later on. You know what I mean?
No, if the United States military was told, when you go into an area, we want you to destroy the women, the children, the babies, the animals, every single living thing that you ever encounter, that would be war crimes. We would consider that as a society immoral.
Okay.
And yet God ordered that. So he thought it was moral. Right? He subjectively thought it was moral to do that.
Okay. I can agree that there are several things that are exaggerated Because
maybe he didn't mean what he said, but he did say that, and he also said,
I just mean like when it was exaggerated, it could have been like, you know, obviously there's like several groups in the Bible that are like it's said that happened, but then they like show up like in the next book. You know what I mean? Like later on in history.
The most important thing on that is there's one story where God says, "You did not do as I told you. You did not destroy every living thing," and that was like God saying, "You didn't do as I told you."
Yeah, you're talking about Saul.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the Bible in 10 years, but I'm going by memory. All right.
I know what part you're talking about.
Yeah. So that was, we generally would not consider that a moral thing to do. And yet God declared it moral, right? Because he's God, right? And that's just very, like, I run into that right away. It's like, right. I'm going to say everything God does is moral, and then he endorses or condones or accepts slavery as an institution. He orders the genocide of an entire culture. All right. And I say, no, that goes against my own morality.
Where does he promote slavery?
What's that?
I said, where? Yeah.
Slavery is accepted throughout the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And specifically, Exodus talks about beating your slaves as long as they don't die. And then Leviticus 25 talks about God says through Moses, you can take slaves to be your property that can be passed on generationally. And it's an absolute statement. It's not a maybe. He says it's acceptable to do that.
So I think you told I don't remember their names. They got on like after me, and I listened for like just a little bit once we got off last time. And it was you mentioned something about, why didn't God and like the Exodus there, well, why didn't he put it down with like the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not, and make it more of an absolute?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a question that I think is valid.
Okay. Well, no, yeah, that's a good question. I think it's kind of a thing that, because we can all find our way around things, right? So he puts down thou shalt not murder. Because it's kind of hard to get around murder. There's no way to say, well, it's not technically murder. It's, whatever. But if God were to put down thou shalt not own slaves, there's probably ways to get around that, kind of like how the South did right after they signed the proclamation, which where they had like the servitude type thing. But it was just essentially slavery, right? So there's like ways we get around it. So God gave very, very specific regulations in that in order to regulate it to lead up to the abolition of slavery. Because then when we continue reading in the Bible and we read through the New Testament and we read, like, say, the book of Philemon, when Paul is writing to Philemon to take his slave Onesimus back, not as a slave, but a brother in Christ. You know what I'm saying? He's leading up to the abolition of slavery. Like when they're writing down slaves obey your masters and stuff like that. It's not a, slaves, have to be slaves and obey your masters. It's sort of a, keep the peace so it can eventually lead to the abolition of slavery. You know what I mean?
I know what you're saying. It's kind of like he was doing incremental adjustments.
Yeah. And he didn't have to do that with murder, but that was more necessary with slavery. You know what I'm saying?
But God, you now have a God that bends to a culture. All right. You have a God that says, well, I know you're doing it, so I'll just incrementally make little adjustments. All right. That's not the character of the God of the Bible. All right. He doesn't bend to cultures. All right. The God of the Bible is all powerful, gives commands that are direct.
Well, I would say he did that in order, so he didn't have to completely destroy a society, and he could incrementally change it. You know what I mean? Rather than going in there and judging them by destroying them. You know what I mean? Like what happens with a lot of societies when they're completely destroyed.
Well, the abolition of slavery didn't happen until, 100 some odd years ago. So for thousands of years, the God sat and said, well, you can own a slave, you can take a slave from a foreign country, you can beat them as long as they don't die, and you can own them and pass them on as property.
Who were the ones that led the abolition of slavery in America?
What?
Who were the ones that led the abolition of slavery in America? It was Christians.
Well, that's irrelevant.
Because they said, God says we all have value, and they believed in that chain.
The Christians
they weren't using the Bible to promote slavery like some was, which was wrong.
The slaveholders were.
So I'm not going to jump into this exchange at all. I just want to say on the record, I disagree with everything Rusty is saying. I'm not going to jump in and Eli, Rusty, people in chat know him as Rusty because they weren't here when he said Eli.
Yeah.
I'm not going to offer my reasons why I think all this is factually incorrect and unreasonable. I just want to be on the record. I just want to be on the record to say that it is, and I'm starting to drop links in private chat. I can't drop it in chat because I can't drop links in your chat because I don't have moderator privileges. But they're there in case Eli wants to check some of these out later.
Gotcha. Thanks a lot.
Eli, one thing.
Hey, but Lou,
I know
I'm about to have to leave really fast.
I'm going to leave you one last thought, and you could contemplate it. Okay?
Okay.
The Bible clearly says it's okay to own other people as property. Years later, that was a discussion amongst Christians when you talk about the abolitionists and all that. But the Christians were split on that. Some Christians used the Bible to say slavery was okay. The people in the South were Christians. All right. So it wasn't.
But who were the ones that led the abolition, though? You know what I mean?
It wasn't. But it was thousands of years later.
Well, they were Christians, though.
And so were the slave owners. Right. Do you know some of the great preachers that evangelicals hold up as being great preachers were slave owners?
Does them being Christian make them do right or wrong?
Right. Jonathan Edwards owned a slave.
Well, does them being Christian make them right or wrong?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm just saying that there's some great preachers who were slave owners. That's all.
Well, there were Christians who that would tell Martin Luther King they had to, ascribe to the law of the land, and Martin Luther King said, no, there's a law above the law of the land, and it says that equally valuable.
Have disagreements, so we'll leave it at that.
All right. Hey, well, thanks a lot, Lou. I know you don't believe it, and I do it. We did it last time. I was wondering if you mind if I pray with you before I get off.
Hey, I never mind that, but I always got to say, I don't think it's going to make a difference.
All right. Well, I understand that, but okay. You mind if we start?
Go ahead.
Awesome. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for all your blessings. God, I thank you for being just such an amazing, awesome God. Lord, the creator of the universe, yet you still want to have a personal relationship with us. Lord God, thank you for sending Jesus to die on the cross for us and take that punishment for our sins. Lord God, you are so great and so amazing. I know that you've put individual callings as well as challenges in each one of our lives, Lord. So, Lord, I pray that you just open our hearts and minds to you so that we can listen to the plans you have for us. We can live for you. God, I pray that it's all for your glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Hey, awesome. Thanks a lot, Lou. See you later, man.
Thanks for stopping by.
For sure.
Appreciate you. So that was Eli. Really nice gentleman. Appreciate his input.
Well, I'm glad you appreciated it. So if any other Christians, I don't know if you want to keep going. Do you want to invite more Christians on to have the discussion with you?
Oh, of course. I mean, I love talking to Christians.
So anybody that's there, the same thing as before, I will leave as soon as you come in because I don't want you to feel like it's 2 against 1. And I don't want to.
I know. And people feel like they're getting ganged up on and all that.
Yeah, I don't want people to feel. That's why I didn't argue back with Eli. I'm like, I don't want to do that to him. So, and I also didn't want to hijack your show either, so I just stayed quiet.
I think Eli is a very typical American Christian, you know.
Sure, a fundamentalist Christian for sure, but yeah, sure.
And a real nice guy. And like usual, I don't have any problem with nice people. I just disagree. That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, everything you said was just factually wrong and unreasonable. But, you know, I'm just going to let it roll. It unfolds however it does. You did a great job. It was frustrating for me and for some of the people in chat because you would clarify where you're at, and then he would not represent what you were saying to him. He kept trying to say, oh, so other people's morality is just as valid as yours to you. And you kept telling him, no, I don't think that. And then he would say, oh, so you defer to society's moral intuitions. And you're like, no, that's not what I said. And he was either not listening to you at all because he was only interested in an opportunity to preach, and he was just waiting for you to finish talking so he could cycle back around to preaching, or he was just trying to manipulate you, and it's up to you to decide which one that was. But it's very...
I think that, I mean, I think you know what I think, James.
Sure.
I think people are kind of conditioned to be thinking a certain way, you know.
Sure.
So it's very difficult to get someone out of a cycle of how they're taught to think, you know.
Right.
It's
I remember.
Hard.
Yeah, I used to be there. I used to be one of those people. It's very hard. You know, when there was, back in the MySpace days, there was religion and philosophy forums. And I was on the religion side of it. And I would argue with atheists all the time. Nobody in those debates ever budged. However, there was a year or two period where we hadn't found a new place to debate yet. And that cooling off period gave people an opportunity to kind of sit with the ideas and kind of ruminate with it, right? And it gave people so much room to grow because now they're not defending their beliefs, they're just thinking on their own space, that when we caught up with each other a few years later, everybody's views had finally changed. Everybody thought differently than they used to. And some Christians became atheists, some atheists became Christians, some people went in a completely different direction. And it was interesting because if MySpace never would have collapsed, we would all still be there, not budging an inch, and none of us would have changed. So the great change doesn't come from debates, but it does come when we plant seeds of ideas with people, and eventually they have this season where they're not defending their beliefs, and it gives them the freedom and the opportunity to re-examine them.
I think that definitely happens. I know for myself, it was similar. I mean, I had to come to a point where I really wanted to analyze what I was believing, you know? If you're not at a point where you even want to think about it, and you're not at a point where you want to open your mind to different ways of thinking about it, you know, doesn't matter what someone says. It just, you know, doesn't matter. You got to come to a point in your own life, I guess, where you contemplate things.
Right.
You know, I mean, the slavery thing to me is like, it's totally factually true that the Bible does condone slavery.
Sure it does.
It never doesn't not. And I understand, you know, Philemon and these different things, but none of them come out and just say what should be said, right?
Right. Now, if a Christian were want to go look up the story about Philemon, for example, they would realize that the scholars don't think it says what the Christians think it says. If they read what scholars say and then they go back and reread the story, and they're honest with themselves about it, they'll go, oh, okay, my church lied to me about what the story says, right? They trained me to see it a certain way. And so every time I read it, I think that's what I'm seeing. But once you start learning from scholars and then become willing to re-examine your own beliefs and you go back and read that stuff, you can discover, it doesn't say what I thought it said at all.
Yeah, and the other thing is, even if, and it doesn't, so, you know, I want to say it doesn't clear up slavery at all. But even if it did, you got then the New Testament again in contradiction with the Old.
Yeah.
Even if it did, and it doesn't.
Right.
But even if you went there, you should still be thinking, well, why did the God say it was acceptable to get people from a foreign land, capture them or take them and own them as property? Like, why did the God say that?
Right.
Even if he later changed his mind, right?
Right. Well, yeah, like you said, there's nothing in the New Testament that unsays it, right? There's no moment where Jesus or any other character in Bibles says, "Oh, you know what? God changed his mind. Now it's wrong to own humans as slavery, as property." And it's interesting because this theory that Eli was putting forth, Rusty as he's known here, that God was just introducing incremental changes to set the stage. Scholars have directly answered that challenge. Dr. Kip Davis is a world-renowned scholar of the Hebrew Bible. He's actually on the committee that is responsible for verifying which texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls are legitimate and which ones are forgeries. He's on that very small team and has been for many years. And Dr. Josh Bowen is also an expert in that field of religious study. Every qualified scholar who speaks on this issue will tell you that what Christian fundamentalists say is taught in Old and New Testament is not what's taught in Old and New Testament. There is no progress even in the New. There is nothing said in the New which is ahead of other cultures surrounding them. Everything said in the New Testament is consistent with what surrounding religious cultures believed and practiced, and secular as well. Everything said in the Old Testament was also entirely consistent with what other cultures around them also believed and practiced. There's never a moment in either set of texts where they start making progress to break away from the norm. Does not happen.
And it's, to me, one of the more clearer things that somebody should be able to see. It's not really disputable. I mean, the God of the Bible did say it's okay to own people as property.
Yeah,
and he never changed that. And again, even if he did, he still said it was okay. Right. At the very least, you have this major contradiction.
Right.
And then there's the idea of the incremental changes, which just goes against, the whole idea that God is absolute and God is, not bowing to cultures. It makes the God one who does bow to cultures.
Right.
The God says, well, you're you're doing some bad things, and I'm going to just allow you to do that for a while until I am able to kind of corral you into my way of thinking.
Right.
And that's just not the God of the Bible.
Nope, it's not at all. So, they teach young people in Christian fundamentalist churches a certain way of reading history and reading texts, and that isn't at all consistent with what actual scholars think. That's not how scholars think. That's not the way the world is. But they've got this false narrative in their mind about what it says, what it meant, how it happened, and they're just wrong, factually wrong, right? And they're entitled to be wrong, but to come on here in other people's space, imagine me or you showing up, and we do want the engagement, don't get me wrong, but imagine me and you showing up at a church and raising our hands to say, well, you guys are only hearing one side of the story. We're atheists, and we'd like to come on there and tell you why you're wrong. Right? They're not going to go, oh, well, we never thought of that. Come on up. Here's the microphone. Right? That's not going to happen.
Because you know what that's called? It's called controlling a milieu.
Yeah. Right.
And it's an important part of mind control and brainwashing.
Sure.
When you control the milieu or the environment and you're only hearing one thing.
Yep.
I understand why Christians believe what they do, because they're hearing it over and over and over, which is also a form of brainwashing.
Yeah.
It's the repetitiveness of hearing the same thing week in and week out for, years and years. I mean, you're conditioning your own mind. right?
Right.
Because you're not hearing the other side, right?
Right.
And it's like, you know, it's a type of mind control.
Well, sure it is. You're controlling the narrative that the mind works with.
Yes. Yeah.
You're limiting what people can think and feel within the context.
Yes, and that's powerful no matter who you are.
Sure.
You know,
it's more,
you know.
It's more power than any human should ever wield over another.
Yeah. And it's limiting freedom of thought.
Sure they are.
You know, which is what my primary problem is with the whole thing. I think that people are conditioned to believe certain things, and that, you know, creates an identity for them, and it creates a community for them, because they're all reinforcing each other's false beliefs.
Yeah. Sure, they're making it more real, which is why a lot of people, if they just stop going to church, let's say they have not only just bad experiences, but maybe they move and never find a church that feels right, or any reason at all, right? Like they move to another country and there's just no churches around. They eventually will probably deconvert. Yes. Because there's nobody around to reinforce the false narrative.
Yes, exactly. And that's why it's so important that they keep saying, come into church, because that's true. They would say, I remember when I was an evangelical, you know, born again Christian, if someone was sliding away from church, we would tell them, oh, it's very important to be part of this fellowship. It's very important.
Right.
Because it is important if you want them to stay in the same mindset. You know,
right.
They have to get that reinforcement, because if they're not, there's a danger they're going to walk away.
Right. Right. You control what people think and how people feel. Noam Chomsky has a book about that called Manufacturing Consent. It is focused more on politics, but technically religion is politics. And, you know, it's an attempt to structure power and structure values. So, and B. Nugents over here in chat says patriotism is similar. I agree. I understand why people are patriotic. I personally can't get behind it, right? I get it. I actually love the idea of feeling proud about a country that you identify with. But at the same time, it's such a fuzzy concept anyways. Country. What is country, right? Is it the government? Because I sure don't identify with those guys. Is it the people? Because we're so diverse, I'm not even sure who the people are as an identity, right? I'm not even sure what any of it means anymore. So when I think of myself and my identity, I identify as a human of Earth, right? I do not walk around thinking of myself as American James or white James or guy James or heterosexual James. That stuff, in a context, if a beautiful woman walks in, I might start thinking about, in terms of I'm a man, hey, baby, right? But in any other context, I'm not thinking about it, right? It just none of those stuffs matter. The religion, a big part of what it does is it divides people from everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, we think alike.
Yeah.
I mean, we think alike. Nice. I mean, I've been an American, born American. I'm white, but I don't think, in terms of America as being greater than another country,
Yeah, I'm not even sure what metric we would use for that. I just don't know what greater would mean in the context. I just don't know. We don't have the best education. We don't have the best healthcare. We don't have. A lot of people think we have the most freedoms, but we actually don't. I don't know. I'm not saying it's all bad here. There's a lot of things about American culture and American experience, and even facets of education and healthcare that I do like. Right? We have some pretty advanced equipment. Some of our doctors and nurses actually care about people. Some of our landscape is very beautiful. Our geography. We have a rich cultural history to look back on, some of which is awful and some of which is wonderful. I just, it's not all bad, but it's not all good either. I don't know how to quantify it. I don't think of myself as an American. I just think of myself as a person.
Me
And this is,
too.
yeah. So, Christianity says, here's a label for you to identify with. This tells you who you are in the world, and it pits you against everyone else. You are not you're not part of the world. You hear that all the time. Don't be part of the world. Well, what's the world? The world is everybody who isn't a Christian, right? And
Yeah.
so all they're doing is dividing those people from me.
Yes.
And because they think that their worthiness to exist and be respected and loved is contingent upon their relationship to God, that means that I'm lesser in their eyes. They can say that they don't think I'm lesser, but they do, right? When I think about Hitler gassing Jews as the earlier example, I recognize myself as morally superior to Hitler and to the people who did that for Hitler. And so there is a moral non-equality there, right? We are not all equally, we do not all have an equal moral character. Some of us are awful, some of us are wonderful. We're all on a spectrum somewhere, and some of it has to do with how much sleep we've had the night before, right? Sometimes we're a grumpy a-hole, and sometimes we're charitable and kind and fuzzy and warm. It depends. It depends. But most of us would never gas a Jew, right? So, it's just all on a spectrum, and the human experience is messy. But when Christianity comes along, it says, no, we're special, right? And they got that from the Jews, because the Jews said, anciently, like biblical Jews, no, we're special. We're God's chosen people, right? Which is just a form of racism. And this is the reason why they had two different laws for slaves in the Hebrew Bible. They had one set of laws for how to treat your Hebrew slaves, and they had a different set of laws for how to treat all other slaves.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's very strange, and you say this to a Christian, they get really upset, but ultimately, God chose a certain group of people over others, right?
Yeah,
so,
according to them, sure.
So isn't that in and of itself, kind of weird?
Well, it's not reasonable. If he's supposed to be everybody's God, right, and he wants to be everybody's God equally, why in the heck have a chosen people? How does that make any sense, right? And if you look back at the Old Testament Jews, they weren't accepting applications. They weren't saying, hey, everybody can be one of us. They were special. They were unique, right? They were set apart from everyone else in their own worldview.
And there was an ethnic part of that as well.
Sure. Yeah. For them, it was all the same.
Like it didn't exist. There wasn't, a race kind of part of it.
Right. They were ethnically superior to everyone else. They were religiously superior to everyone else. They were ideologically superior, culturally superior, right, to everyone as far as they were concerned. And I understand the desire to want to feel that way, to want to feel special, and to have sort of a tribal way of being in the world. But I would like to think humanity's ready to outgrow all that stuff.
I hope so, but I've seen like a backwards trend over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, America is certainly more divided than it's ever been before, as far as I know.
Yeah, and there's this there's this Christian dominionism, which is becoming very prominent. The Christians have to control, the Congress and the presidency and the different things so that they can have more control. All right. And I know all Christians aren't in that boat, but there's certainly a lot that are in that, dominionism type theology, right?
Yeah.
Christians should be running things,
Right.
That's just like that really irks me.
Well, sure, it's dangerous too. That particular faction of Christianity they honestly believe that we're in the end times, and that it's their job to help convert the people of Israel over to their version of Christianity, and then to help literally destroy the world. They believe that at the end, God uses them to help destroy the world. And the last people you want in charge of a nation in the world's largest nuclear arsenal and the world's largest military are a dangerous cult who thinks that we're just years away from them intentionally destroying every living thing on the planet.
Yeah, it's that's why I'm on YouTube in 2025. It's because of that. I just want to do my little piece, my little, 2 cents to try to combat that type of thinking that America has to be Christian.
Right.
It's
So,
really like that really is scary to me.
right. Now, Tenebris Sint says that special in the context of the biblical Hebrews refers to bringing the Torah to the world, not racially superior. I don't read that at all in those texts, Tenebris. How would you justify having two different sets of laws for Hebrew slaves versus all other slaves? The Hebrew slaves, there are specific limits about how abusive you can be, and you have to set them free on the 7th year, and you have to set them free with a whole bunch of goods so they can start a new life, right? But for the foreign slaves, those are not voluntary. It is not based on debts that they owed anybody. They were captured. They were purchased against their will, brought over into Hebrew territories against their will, and they're slaves for life and can be inherited as property generation to generation, right? They don't get to go free. They're not entitled to the same rights and privileges as the Hebrew indentured servants are, which are still a form of slavery, right? If you have a people, to even be a chosen people, I mean, chosen for what? Now, Tenebris says to bring Torah to the world, but one, they didn't do that. So that means God failed. Two, if you read the stories, they weren't even trying to do that, right? They didn't go up to a neighboring nation with Torahs in hand and say, "Greetings, neighbors. We brought fruit baskets and flowers and passages we'd like to read you over a campfire, like and hugs too. Who wants a hug?" No, they surrounded these cities and said, "You guys are now our slaves for life, or if you make us do it the hard way, we're going to rampage and destroy every woman, every man, woman, and child, except sometimes our God says we can keep the young girl virgins for ourselves," right? Depending on the mood God was in at the time. Sometimes he lets us, sometimes he doesn't let us, right? That is not spreading Torah. That is spreading violence and destruction and slavery and death and suffering and injustice, right? If you think that's the Torah, then why should we want to see it spread? And if you think that's not the Torah, then why was that what they were actually spreading in their own stories?
When just looking at things in a very simplistic way, admittedly simplistic, but isn't it crazy that like the God who is supposed to be all powerful and all knowing, right, is attempting to solve a problem, right, of sin and
Yeah,
attempting to do this, and he's dealing with people who are corrupt and doing the wrong thing, and he still hasn't solved that problem.
no, if you read the stories, yeah, if you read the stories, he created the problem in the first place, and now he has no idea how to solve it.
Because it's like he's really a failure, like when you really look at it.
Sure.
Right. I mean, the devil is still out there, according to, this type of thinking. All right. The devil wasn't eliminated. He's still out there.
Well, sure, in the Christian story. Now, to be fair, the Jewish religions of the biblical religions, they didn't have a devil like the Christians have. The Christians invented the devil, and they redefined what sin meant. So the Jews had a different idea of what sin was. To transgress against God in the ancient Jewish religions was just to disobey something, right? You just, here's the laws, and then you do something in violation of the laws. It's that simple. And then all you had to do was make it up to him by making some kind of sacrifice, on the approved list of sacrifices.
And God also forgave people without crucifying his son or having his son.
Yeah, the ancient Jewish biblical religion had no sense of being a foreshadow of a permanent sacrifice from a human sacrifice. Like, these were not part of the Jewish religion at all. Christianity invented that later.
No, I know. And what's so, like, to me, weird, or I would even say insidious on the part of Christianity as a religion, is they've kind of taken upon themselves to kind of hijack Judaism, right? They kind of hijack it and say, you know, we know what you really, you know, were trying to say. That you have to come to Christianity to tell you about Judaism, when in reality they're just completely two different belief systems.
Right. They're not compatible at all.
No, but they try to make it like they own it. It's like arrogant, right?
Right.
Like they own Judaism, right? You could only understand Judaism from the perspective of Christianity.
Right.
That's
There's
like so arrogant.
right. There's a comic. Man, I'm trying to remember his name now. Lewis Black. He has a skit about this where he talks about Christianity and how it doesn't understand the Jewish texts. And it's hilarious skit if you want to look up Lewis Black talking about the
I've seen it.
Christian. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's great.
He says, yeah, you're talking about our book.
Yeah. yeah. It's hilarious. So Tenebris says, if these claims were true, Jews would have been an empire, but never were. In Judaism, everyone can go to heaven. So heaven wasn't originally a Jewish idea. It influenced from other surrounding cultures around the same time that Christianity was beginning to form. Were influenced by that idea, but the idea of going to a heaven wasn't a thing. The kingdom that was supposed to be established for Jews within the Jewish texts was an establishing of an earthly kingdom of ruled by and for earthly Jews, and that it would be established by divine authority and be supported by divine might. And so the idea of heaven wasn't part of it. Like this, it's just anciently Jews never talked about going to heaven. That wasn't the thing.
And the Messiah wasn't to be a god.
Right, not at all. Well, even for the earliest Christians, he wasn't either. He became that as the ideas about Jesus grew afterwards. But as far as the Jews never being an empire, here's how that works, Tenebris. And I'm not trying to pick on people that are dead for millennia now. But they didn't want to get along with anybody, right? They did not have the kind of economic, social, societal, government, military. They did not have the kinds of power it would take to be able to pick the fights that they were picking, right? They went around poking bears because we're special, right? And refusing to get along and play nice and integrate with other societies that they were migrating to, right? They're the new people in town. They refused to get along because they could never make any place home long enough. And they would just snub their noses at everybody. We don't want to get along. We're God's chosen special people. Our ways are the right ways. Get out of our way. And people would be like, we were here first. We have a lot more military and economic power than you do. Shut the hell up. Right. And eventually people got tired of dealing with these Jewish nomadic tribes that didn't want to fit in, and play nice. And so then they would turn on the Jews, right? The schism would grow more and more extreme until violence happened. And this is because of bad leadership and bad ideology, right? This is what has always happened with the Jews. They go on causing problems, and then when things go badly, oh no, we are being the persecuted. And I'm like, give me a freaking break. If you even read their stories, they admit to how obnoxious, violent, and separatist they were. So let's take it for what it is.
Well, I'd say the Christians always feel they're being persecuted.
Sure, that's where Christians learned it from.
I remember when I was a Christian, it was like that was really like something that would really appeal to Christians. Seeing that someone is persecuted, or if you had the honor of dying for Christ, that you were somehow special, martyrdom. And in America, I see that Christians seem to think, they're like a non-privileged group, when if you look at every standard that you could put on it, they actually are privileged, not privileged.
Right, they're very privileged. but they like to imagine themselves as persecuted.
Yes, that everything is against them, right?
Sure.
I mean, I like to say to them, try being an atheist.
Right, yeah, try that for a while.
Right. It's like, Christianity gets a pass in America.
Yeah, to even commit some crimes to get a pass.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, even within, I mean, these are little things that I know because I have some inside information. All right.
Yeah.
Like, there's things like having to do with employees, employee law, and churches will get a pass. All right. Even though they act as a business and they don't pay taxes, but like, you can be a church and get away with kind of abusing your employees. And it's because they give you leeway that you wouldn't get if you just were a regular business.
Right.
You can do things that a regular business would be in a lot of trouble for.
Yeah.
But if you're a church doing it, you can get away with certain things.
I'm sure you can.
The law kind of is very light on you as a church.
Absolutely. Or like Jehovah's Witnesses denying their children blood transfusions. Or
Right.
Or, if you think about it, Christianity at the heart of it is a racketeering scheme. It is extortion. It is our mysterious boss owns this town and everyone in it. And unless you yield to our authority over your life, and we can talk about the money later, when the boss comes to town, he's going to be tired of waiting and he's just going to destroy you and your children. Right? It is a racketeering scheme. Yield or else we will hurt you or our boss will hurt you. Right? He sent us to let you know, yield to us or he'll hurt you when he gets here. You can't wait till he shows up as proof and then change your mind. You got to decide now. And it's just, if any other group were to run a racketeering scheme that way, they would immediately have the federal agents at their door arresting them for racketeering. But
Right.
Christianity can do it because it's part of their religion.
Right. And they have a hands-off type of approach.
Yeah.
Hands off,
Yeah.
unless it's, something so unless there's a big public outcry.
Yeah.
Right. They pretty much keep hands off when it comes to Christianity in America.
Right. And you know what would happen if a government passed a law to say you guys can't run this extortion anymore? You can't keep selling fraudulent afterlife insurance policies. You can't keep running extortion and calling it grace. The Christians would cry persecution. They would get violent about it, right? They would get extreme about it. And it would cause all kinds of problems at every level for society. And so we have to let them have their way because they have enough people and enough people in government. We can't even afford to try to tell them to live by the same ethical standards that everyone else has to live by.
Yeah. I mean, I know I had a specific because I have some insight that I can't even talk about a big mega church. But I have insight to the government literally saying, no, we're not going to approach that. If it was a business, we would step in, but church, no, we're laying off.
Right.
Which means they're privileged, right? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's what privilege is, right?
Right. I want to remind everybody that if any Christians that are here and want to talk with Lou alone, again, I'll be happy to jump off of here and you can jump in. Or, a Jew or a theist, anybody at all. I'll leave so you can have that discussion with Lou.
Well, I'm going to be cutting off anyway because I have to go get some dinner. All right. But
yeah.
It's been a really nice conversation. And James, I don't know anything about what they call the monitors or the moderators.
Oh yeah.
I don't know anything about that, but I do know that somehow it's important. And I don't know about it, but if you ever wanted to be a moderator, how it works, I would love you to be a moderator.
Well, I appreciate that. So if you look over here where it says private chat and comments, on the right on StreamYard.
Okay, I'm on StreamYard, yeah.
So do you see where it on the right does it say private chat and comments at the top?
Let's see. Private chat.
On the right of our window where we're talking in StreamYard.
Well, there's the chat in StreamYard. I see that.
All right. So if you see that, there might be some dots next to names you can click on, like 3 dots. You might be able to pull down a menu.
Let me see. If I go here, okay, yeah, there's 3 dots. Delete comment, put user in timeout, and ban user.
Oh, that's all you're seeing from that end, eh? Well,
Yeah.
it might make you go to the user side of your own channel, like so that where you're where the other people see, like that's not in StreamYard, right?
On
So
YouTube,
on YouTube, you might be able to see it there where you click on the next to the names.
Let me see something. I'm just gonna pull up YouTube and see because I'm just on StreamYard.
I just dropped a link to your own channel there in private chat, but you can look it up too if you want to.
Let me see something. If I come in here.
So while Lou's looking for that, it's not my intention to offend anyone. Nobody got timed out. No, I just want to be able to. Most people in chat here behave so far, right? But I mostly want to be able to drop necessary educational links, and that would be a lovely ability to have, which I have to have a moderator range to do. Though I am a moderator at some pretty big channels, including Myth Vision. I don't know who here follows Myth Vision, but it's a great place to be for education on these kinds of topics. Oh, the Jews were Canaanites. Israel didn't absorb the Canaanites, Tenebris. If you go back far enough, the reason that the Canaanite language is the same as the Hebrew language is because they were the same people. If you Google this, it's not hard to find, right? They came from the Canaanites. They broke away from the Canaanites and began developing their own separatist identity. This is why the Hebrew Bible is so heavily polemic against the Canaanites. It's the people that they were trying to distance themselves from. When the Jews wrote, this is the reason why the Jews, when they wrote the Torah, they were polytheists. They were not monotheists. Monotheism didn't happen until, it was a messy process. At the beginning of the Second Temple period is the beginning of their process of converting to monotheism, but even that was messy. What really happened at that time is they became henotheists, which is not really monotheism. Monotheism took many centuries after that.
Hey, James, I added you on YouTube as a standard moderator, whatever
Awesome.
that means.
Right. So everybody that's a moderator is standard except for one person you can pick anytime you want to be a special moderator. The only difference is the special moderator can moderate the other moderators. Other than that, they have the exact same powers. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know when you're on, but if you're on, I think you'll be a moderator. So
awesome. So yeah,
I appreciate that, and appreciate your time and everyone who stopped in. All right, I really appreciate it. I have a very small following, but I appreciate every single person, both Christian, non-Christian, theist, non-theist. You're all welcome here.
Absolutely.
And, add, subscribe if you're not, like if you can, and I'll see all of you another time. I hope to grow and have more interesting conversations.
Awesome. Thanks, Lou. Have a great evening, and everyone else here too.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye.